Go ahead in there.
Make yourself comfortable, pal.
When it became clear that his story was not matching with the evidence that we had, he says, all right, I did it.
I did it.
Let's see right in there.
It's really unclear how much she knows at that point.
She was a young girl who had a lot to go for in her life and got hooked up with the wrong guy.
They were in adjacent rooms, and he was screaming, I love you, to her.
I know you can hear me. You know we stop loving you. It's okay.
It was a toxic relationship.
They're an ordinary couple just ring shopping while he's lying dead in the garage.
I'm here for you.
Love can make people do a lot of crazy things. Love can make people do anything they put their mind to.
Just 90 minutes from New York City, Asbury Park, New Jersey is a beachside community nestled in the heart of the Jersey Shore.
Asbury Park is a shore town. It gets exceptionally busy in the summertime, family friendly. There's a big boardwalk. It attracts a lot of people looking for a good time.
You don't see as much violent crime, but it still exists.
On February 9th, 2017, a young woman, Tracy, walked into the Asbury Park Police Department and reported her boyfriend, Trupal Patel, to be missing. She had last heard from Trupal Patel on February 6th of 2017.
Tracy had said that they had spent the morning together, and she knew that he was going to Asbury Park. She didn't know why, but they had had some plans to get together for a celebration for his birthday, and she had been calling him. He hadn't been responding.
Tracy was incredibly concerned for Trupal. She believed that something had happened to him.
Authorities asked Tracy for more information about Trupal and learned that the 28-year-old was born in India.
They were a loving family. They had means. They weren't poor by any stretch of the imagination. They, at some point, moved to New Jersey to live their life. They were running their own convenience store.
Trupal came into his own and developed a great many friendships.
The first time I met Trupal, I was bartending, and he just got off of work one day and somehow ended up at my bar and started talking to him. I knew that he was a forever friend. Trupal wanted to make sure that everyone was happy around him. Trupal was just one of a kind. Man that would give you shirt off his back.
He was known to be very generous with his friends, things like picking up dinner tabs or picking up the tab for drinks.
He paid like the whole bill every time he went out with us. Always tipped well. Money wasn't an issue. There was not a bad bone in that guy's body.
In February of 2015, Trupal met Tracy, and the two instantly clicked.
Trupal and Tracy had dated for several years.
Trupal wanted to spend all of his free time with her. Anytime there was a holiday or a birthday, Tracy was Trupal's go-to person.
Just one day shy of Trupal's 29th birthday, Tracy has enlisted police to help find her boyfriend.
Tracy did not believe that he would just take off and not respond to her calls and, calls and text messages from other friends. She was pretty adamant that something had happened to him.
Tracy tells authorities that Trupal hasn't been to his apartment in 3 days, and his car isn't parked there either.
You're going to give the police department identifiable characteristics of that person. In this case, it was a large Buddha tattoo that Trupal Patel had on his back.
We asked about some things that he would have been wearing at the time, and one of those things was a very nice Movado watch. As I recall, it was a black face with diamonds around it. The car that Trupal Patel drove was rather unique. in that it was a 2003 black Jaguar with a standard shift transmission.
The police compile a flyer that's distributed to law enforcement. Local jails and hospitals would also be checked.
Posters are going up, comments are being made on social media. The word is out that Trupel is missing, and he is nowhere in sight. There is not a sign of Trupel anywhere.
2 hours later, a local tow truck driver contacts police.
AAA notified the Asbury Park Police Department because they found Trupel Patel's car.
Trupel's car was found in Asbury Park.
It was unoccupied and had been parked on the side of the road.
The driver explains he was hired by someone claiming to be locked out of the Jaguar.
AAA notified the Asbury Park Police Department because they realized that they weren't the actual owner of the vehicle.
When investigators arrive, they are greeted by the tow truck driver and are stunned to see who made the call to the tow truck company, Trupel's girlfriend, Tracy.
Tracy and Trupel's friends conducted their own investigation into Trupel being missing. They distributed missing persons flyers throughout the Asbury Park area. Tracy and Trupel's friends locate Trupel's car parked outside of an auto body shop on Langford Street in Asbury Park.
Once they found Trupel Patel's car, they tried to gain access to it by calling AAA.
They were concerned that he might have been in the trunk.
Authorities decide to act on Tracy's concerns.
There was entry made into the car to see if Trupel happened to be in the trunk. He was not.
There were no signs of any sort of struggle. It didn't look as though the car had been broken into or that there was any signs of foul play.
When investigators press Tracy for more information about Trupel's plans in Asbury Park 3 days earlier, she admits she's been withholding one major piece of information.
Trupel Patel was a marijuana dealer. He dealt in larger quantities of marijuana.
Tracy knew that he was selling drugs and just didn't want to tell the police because they felt that it would sway or kind of prejudice us against Trupel and the possibility that he was a legitimate victim.
Police wanted to know if there was a connection between Trupel's drug dealing and Trupel's disappearance.
He could have developed an enemy from selling marijuana.
Coming up, the discovery of a body shifts the investigation into high gear.
It was quite obvious that there was a human wrapped up in that blanket.
He had been a victim of gunshot wounds.
And a sordid romance takes shape as authorities search for a killer.
Anybody who knew them knew that they had a pretty toxic, sometimes volatile relationship.
Hours after 28-year-old Trupel Patel was reported missing, authorities in Asbury Park, New Jersey have just learned from his girlfriend Tracy that Trupel had been selling marijuana at a local apartment complex the day he disappeared.
On February 6th, the last place Trupel Patel had gone was to Monroe Towers, an apartment building in Asbury Park, to meet with a friend, and he was there to sell her marijuana.
Investigators head for Monroe Towers in order to retrace Trupel's steps.
There were 3 people that Trupel Patel had seen at the Monroe Towers. They were narcotic sales. And we spoke with all of those people, including the manager, who said that he, came, they spoke with him, and that he had left of his own free will.
Surveillance footage shows Trupel Patel leaving the building at about 3:30 on February 6th. He does not look to be in distress. He looks very calm. He is, just a regular guy walking to his car in the parking lot.
Investigators collect the surveillance footage as evidence and return to the station to dig further into Truppel's background. That's when they discover a recent arrest that might provide more clarity on his disappearance.
We learned that prior to Truppel Patel's disappearance, he had recently been arrested.
In 2016, Ocean County had made an arrest of Truppel. He had 4 pounds of marijuana and mushrooms, and he spent a few months in jail. Eventually, Truppel had been released on bail, but he had a court case pending.
They were thinking that he had some pending drug charges and maybe he left town so he didn't have to face those charges.
It kind of lent more towards what may have happened to him, at least a reason as to why he went missing. Quite some time passed. There were no further leads in his missing person case, either through the Asbury Park Police Department or through Tracy and her friends conducting their own canvass of the area.
It just didn't make sense. Like, he wasn't someone who was going to go away. Like, it wasn't like he was going to suddenly take a downward spiral. It wasn't anything like that.
On February 22nd, 13 days after the initial missing persons report, police receive a disheartening call.
My office was notified that there was a body found in the Shark River Park. This is approximately 3 miles from Asbury Park along Gully Road in the township of Wall. I immediately head over to the area where the body was located.
And it was down an embankment, almost as if somebody had tossed him and he had rolled down the hill and he had been hidden from view.
This is a rural stretch of road. There's forest on both sides, and it's very dark at night. And the way that the landscape is there, the road is at a level, and then there's a ravine that kind of drops off.
A park ranger had been picking up trash in the area, happened to get further into that area of the park and was able to discover the body.
It was quite obvious that there was a human wrapped up in that blanket. You could see his skin, part of his head was sticking out. I believe you could see his shoes.
His body was actually in very good condition. It was the wintertime, it had been very cold, and it appeared that he had been a victim of gunshot wounds. Detectives were able to make the identification pretty quickly due to a tattoo, a Buddha tattoo that was on his back.
We were able to match that particular tattoo to Truppel Patel. So we immediately initiate a homicide investigation.
Detectives essentially now have to work backwards and figure out how Truppel Patel came to be deceased in Shark River Park. They had to go back to the beginning and try to figure out, who potential suspects even were at that point.
Nearly 2 weeks after 28-year-old Truppel Patel was first reported missing, Asbury Park police have discovered his bullet-riddled body in a residential park.
Detectives at the scene observed gunshot wounds to Truppel's body, and they did not observe any blood in the area. It appeared that his body had been dumped there and he had been pushed down the embankment from the roadway.
We turned the body over to a medical examiner for a closer examination to determine manner and cause of death. After we identified Truppel Patel, we immediately contacted some of the investigators that were involved with his arrest, finding out who he might have been involved with. Did he ever turn state's evidence against anyone in order for a special deal on his charges, things of that nature? Those would have been all reasons that somebody would have wanted Trupel dead, right? But we did not find anything.
When authorities break the news of Trupel's death to his parents, they struggle to process the heartbreaking reality.
They were devastated. I think as any parent would be, they were overcome with grief.
Trupel's family was just, upset to be in this situation, and they really wanted justice for their son.
Trupel's parents can't think of anyone who would want to hurt their son. Trupel's friends share the same sentiment.
Detectives took a number of statements from various friends of Trupel to try to ascertain who might dislike Trupel or have a grudge against him or have any reason to want to kill him.
When they found his body in Shark River, I was just like, who? Who could have done this? Why would someone kill Trupel? Trupel's such a nice guy. He was friends with everyone. How did anyone hurt him?
Everyone had great things to say about him. He was friendly, he was generous, he was never intimidating, he was never threatening. So it came as a shock to people when they learned that he was dead.
He could be described as sort of your friendly neighborhood marijuana dealer, and he predominantly sold marijuana to suburban middle-class individuals.
If someone took from him, he'd be like, okay, well, I'm not going to sell to them again. That was it. It didn't matter to him. He didn't need revenge.
There was, no one that really wanted him deceased in terms of enemies.
The following day, an autopsy report offers investigators further insight into Trupel's murder.
They learned that the cause of death is gunshot wounds, 2 to the head, 1 to the chest.
The medical examiner determined that Trupel Patel was killed with a .22 caliber rifle. Specifically, the murder weapon was identified as a Marlin long rifle.
When investigators compare the autopsy findings to details from Trupel's missing persons report, one item in particular stands out.
Trupel was known to wear a very fancy, very flashy Movado watch, and that watch was not found on his body.
The next thing police are asking themselves is, was this a robbery gone bad? Was Trupel simply a target because of his bling?
Detectives were definitely considering whether robbery was a motive. The missing watch is definitely a lead. You can go to different pawn shops in the area and see if the watch was sold.
Investigators don't get any hits, so they appeal to the public.
At this point, there's no leads, so they turn to the media for help.
They posted information about Trupel as well as his vehicle, a picture of the vehicle. They posted that online and sent it out to news agencies and asked anybody with information to contact the prosecutor's office. And that led to Tyler Uhas coming forward.
My name is Tyler Uhas, and I lived in Neptune at the time, and that's pretty much, the next town over.
Tyler Uhas sees the picture of the Jaguar in the news, and he recognizes that Jaguar, and he becomes concerned about his involvement with that Jaguar.
I moved the vehicle onto Asbury Avenue in Asbury Park, and at that point, I went forward to the prosecutor's office and told them everything I knew.
Tyler Uhas has just arrived at the Monmouth County Prosecutor's Office, alleging he has information about a black Jaguar belonging to murder victim Trupel Patel.
Tyler gives a statement to detectives where he says that he moved the car at the behest of Joseph Villani.
I used to be friends with Joey back in 2016, I believe. We became friends. Joey was always in the same parties and same areas I was in, so that's how we became friends.
Joey Villani had 2 older brothers. He lived in Ocean Township with his father. His mother lived in Maryland.
Tyler tells investigators that on the morning of February 8th, 2017, Joey had called him with a favor.
So Joey calls me one day on FaceTime and says to me, "Hey bro, I need you to move my uncle's car to the shop so it can get brakes done." And I'm like, "Well, why can't you move it yourself?"
He needed Tyler's help driving it because Joey could not drive a stick shift car, and the vehicle had to be moved to an auto body shop in Asbury Park.
He says, "Can we just drive it over there tomorrow? I got an appointment." And that's when I said, "Okay, whatever, no big deal, I guess." That next day, he calls me and picks me up from my house. We're on our way to his house. Once we get to his house, I get in the car. So from there, I drive the car to the shop. And as I was parking the car, I saw Joey parking on the adjacent side of the road. I take the keys out of the ignition, I get out of the car, and I go to run inside the shop to hand him the keys, and he yells, they got one, just get in the car and let's go. So I got in the car, and we left. In between that time of us leaving and him going to drop me off, I'm like, this just doesn't sound right. None of this sounds right. Like, I just screwed up big time. I just did something wrong.
Tyler says his suspicions were confirmed 2 weeks later.
It's the article about that car. And the picture of the vehicle was of that Jaguar. And that's how I put 2 and 2 together, and right from there I went forward to the prosecutor's office.
Tyler informs investigators that Joey Villani spends most of his time with his girlfriend, Raquel Garajau.
He said Joseph Villani and Raquel Garajau started dating approximately 1 year or more prior to this occurring.
Raquel was, your typical 19-year-old college student. She was smart. She was very vivacious.
She lived with her mother and her older sister. She was attending Brookdale Community College to get her associate's degree. She worked part-time at a law office for an attorney.
Raquel, I met through Joey. She was just a regular girl. I mean, she liked her material things. She loved her makeup, having hair, nails done.
She met Joey Villani towards the end of her high school career.
I remember we were at a party one night, and Joey just runs into her, and then he starts talking to her, and he ends up inviting her back to the house, and ever since then, they were just a couple.
According to Tyler, the relationship between Raquel and Joey had its share of ups and downs.
They would always be happy when they were together and they were doing their own thing, and then, obviously one little thing would happen and there'd be, a huge fight. And then 2-3 seconds later, they would become, A-okay again, and I love you this, I love you that.
Anybody who knew them knew that they had a pretty toxic, sometimes volatile relationship.
Joey and Raquel, they like to have a good time. They'd use drugs, in particular marijuana, and they also dealt in smaller quantities of marijuana amongst their friend circle and other kids that they knew in the area.
Tyler suggests that Joey had developed a sense of competition with Trupal Patel when it came to selling marijuana.
I know Joey used to always say how he wanted to meet Trupal. He would jokingly say that he wanted to meet him so he could rob him. Joey's friend used to pick up off of Trupal a lot. I believe that's how Joey met Trupal.
Tyler swears that he had no idea he was driving Trupal Patel's car when he helped Joey on February 8th.
The next investigative step would be to really verify Tyler's story.
Detectives asked Tyler if he would agree to make phone calls to Joey Villani that would be recorded by police to see what Joey would say about moving Trupal's car.
I was beyond nervous. All you're thinking about is, am I going to get in trouble for something? Is this it? You know, what the hell? Like, why me?
Two days after Monmouth County authorities discovered Trupal Patel murdered, Tyler Uhas has just claimed that his friend, 20-year-old Joey Villani, had asked him to move Trupal's car 2 weeks earlier.
Tyler was adamant that he had no information about the homicide of Trupal Patel, that he just moved the car for Joey.
So they asked me to call Joey on the phone on speaker and blatantly straight up tell him that I have the cops at my door about Trupal's car and I need help.
Hello?
Yo, dude, yeah. Bro, the cops are at my house, bro.
You're lying, bro. You're lying.
I'm not lying.
All right, so let's just say, if the cops ask you, did you drive a black or a Jaguar, whatever they say, all right?
Okay.
You say no. You just say no. You say no, bro. Just deny, bro. Deny.
Okay.
It was clear to law enforcement officers, based on the conversation, that Joe Villani knew all about the victim's car because he was coaching Tyler Uhas in how to handle the police.
So detectives tell Tyler to set up a meeting with Joey.
All right, meet me at the Monmouth Mall, bro, in front of the movie theater. Head there right now, please.
All right.
All right, go. I'm on my way there.
When Joey arrives, his girlfriend Raquel Garajau is with him.
On February 24th, Joey and Raquel head to the Monmouth Mall, thinking they're meeting up with Tyler Uhas, and instead, Monmouth County detectives are there waiting for them.
Investigators bring both Joey and Raquel back to the Monmouth County Prosecutor's Office for questioning.
Go ahead in there.
Make yourself comfortable, pal.
Joey is in one interview room and Raquel is in another. Investigators speak to them separately.
Before Joey's interview officially begins, investigators collect an important piece of evidence from him.
What he had been wearing at the time was a Movado watch. So he did remove the watch and it was placed into an evidence bag. We immediately start reaching out to Tracy, can you please get us a picture of Trupal Patel wearing the watch?
While investigators wait for a response from Trupal's girlfriend, they begin questioning Joey about his relationship to the victim.
Have you ever met Troop before?
No.
Maybe you're at parties together?
Are there mutual... I met him... I did meet him once, but
Okay.
That's it.
About an hour into their interview with Joey, investigators get the proof they need from Trupal's girlfriend, Tracy.
During his interview, I brought out the picture of Trupal Patel wearing the watch.
I noticed that you have a nice watch in your possession there. That's also a very similar, almost, I guess, the same watch that's on Troop.
Could be.
It could be.
Joey continues to stonewall investigators. In the room next door, investigators immediately confront Raquel about Trupal Patel's murder.
What knowledge do you have about Trupal's murder?
Nothing.
About how he was killed?
Nothing. I just know that it was a murder. He got shot in the head from the Asbury Park thing.
Shot in the head from what Asbury Park thing?
Or it was... Yeah, shot. I read it on Facebook. Yeah.
You said something about a gunshot wound to the head. You want to know something? Nobody knows about that.
Investigators continue to pressure Raquel until she finally admits that Joey had confessed to her.
She ultimately says that Joey killed Trupel in self-defense and that it happened in Joey's garage.
What did Joey tell you about that? How did he tell you he killed him?
Shot him.
Whose gun did he use to shoot him?
His sister's.
At that point, we were unsure as to her level of involvement. Did she just know about it? Was she involved before, during, after?
I just need you to be truthful. Take a deep breath and tell us what happened.
So Trupel went to Joey's house on Monday. And while I was at work. And they started arguing. I guess it got really physical. Trupel was threatening him. Joey freaked out.
Raquel told detectives that she was at work during the time of the murder.
Did you see his body?
No.
Did you help clean up?
No.
While Joey and Raquel are held in custody, investigators race to the alleged scene of the crime.
The Monmouth County detectives executed a search warrant on the parents' home of Joey Villani.
When they search that residence, they find a .22 caliber Marlin long rifle.
We learned that the murder weapon had been located in the house.
Detectives found shell casings in the garage for a .22 caliber bullet. Detectives were able to collect blood samples from the garage. Those samples were later tested, and it was determined to be Trupel Patel's blood.
With physical evidence tying Joey to the crime, investigators now need a confession.
When it became clear that his story was not matching with the evidence that we had, he, at one point in his interview, kind of throws his hands up and says, "All right, I did it."
I did it. I shot Trooper Patel. Raquel had nothing to do with it. I had told her I had done it, but that's it.
Ultimately, he admitted that he was going to rip him off, and there was some type of altercation. And during the course of that, in self-defense, he tried to protect himself and shot and killed Trupel Patel. Joey stated that Raquel Garajau had nothing to do with it.
Investigators tell Raquel that Joey has come clean.
They were in adjacent rooms, and he was screaming, "I love you" to her. She was being interviewed next door.
Raquel, I know you can hear me.
We never saw President. United West for the day that I got this. I promise. Raquel. It's okay. I'm here for you.
Joseph Villani was ultimately arrested and charged with the death of Trupel Patel. After questioning Raquel Garajau, she was released and was not charged.
Why don't you come with us?
We didn't have really any other evidence to show that she was involved.
In order to clear Raquel of any wrongdoing, investigators need to corroborate her story.
Before Raquel left the prosecutor's office that night, she had given consent to search her cell phone. It's really unclear how much she knows at that point. So that was one of the first things that we started doing, was going through her cell phone. She had deleted all of her text messages with Joey, and we were able to recover those.
Authorities discover that leading up to Trupel's murder, Raquel had sent Joey an incriminating text.
On January 19th, Joey texted Raquel that the rifle works and that he's got the bullets. A few days later, I think it was on February 2nd, Raquel sends a text message to Joey, "You need to clean the bullets." She was instructing him to wipe the bullets down, thinking he would leave fingerprints on them.
Following Trupel's death, Raquel sent more damning texts to Joey.
She was just telling Joey to kind of like how to deal with it, like clean up, bleach everything. Like it was just very cold. No remorse was found in any of their text messages. In addition to the text messages of the cell phone records, the cell phone location records really build our case against Raquel.
What we did determine using her cell phone, she was in the area of Joey's house. She did not go to work that day.
We realized she was lying about multiple things.
So at that point, a determination was made to go to the grand jury and get an indictment for Raquel.
Monmouth County investigators have discovered evidence that suggests 20-year-old Joey Villani and his girlfriend, 19-year-old Raquel Garajau, had plotted the murder of Trupel Patel together.
On May 15, 2017, so about 3 months after Joey is arrested, Raquel is arrested and charged with the same crime. She's charged with felony murder, armed robbery, conspiracy, and other related offenses. We had Trupel's blood in Joey's garage. We had Trupel's blood in Joey's car. We had the murder weapon in Joey's house. So we had a really strong case against Joey Villani. Not the same with Raquel, though. The case against her was very circumstantial.
On July 17, 2018, the trial of Raquel Garajau begins in Monmouth County, New Jersey.
She was a young girl who had a lot to go for in her life and got hooked up with the wrong guy.
It was a toxic relationship, and Joey wanted to make her happy. And Raquel wanted certain things to be happy. She wanted money, she wanted nice things, and at the time, Joey had $1.31 in his bank account, and Trupel was somebody that they realized that they could target. You know, he wasn't a violent guy. The evidence shows that on February 6th, Trupel Patel left Monroe Towers at about 3:30 and drove to Joey Villani's house in Ocean Township.
Trupel is going to Joey's house to just make another drug sale. He walks into Joey's garage. Joey has a .22 caliber long rifle, like a hunting rifle, and Joey shoots Trupel 3 times, twice in the head, once in the chest.
This was not a self-defense case. The medical examiner concluded that Trupel Patel was not shot at close range. He was shot from further away.
Cell phone records show Raquel in close proximity, going back to Joey's house shortly after.
And Raquel searches how to drive a stick shift at 4:23 p.m., which is probably only, minutes after Trupel is murdered. So we believed that when he realized the car was a stick shift, they had to go to Plan B at that point and reach out to Tyler.
Prosecutors argue the couple took Trupel's money and went shopping.
Trupel Patel made a lot of money selling marijuana. He was also known to carry large amounts of cash on his person.
We believe Joey takes all of Trupel's marijuana, his cash, his Movado watch. We put the ballpark of the cash around maybe $2,000.
They go to the mall, to Pandora, and Joey buys Raquel a promise ring that she's been asking him for in cash for $400.
They're buying Raquel a ring. They're an ordinary couple just ring shopping while Trupel's lying dead in the garage.
We believe that Trupel's body was in Joey Villani's garage from about the time of the homicide, which we put at about 4 o'clock on February 6th, until sometime later that night into the early hours of the following morning.
The defense asserts Raquel's only offense was falling for Joey Villani.
There was no physical evidence, no statements from anyone connecting Raquel Garajau to Patel's death. And as a matter of fact, her co-defendant now, Joseph Villani, had indicated Raquel Garajau had nothing to do with the death of Trupel Patel. Make sure you clean the bullets was the text that was most problematic in the case because it occurred 3 days before the death of Trupel Patel.
After a 10-week trial, jury deliberations get underway on September 12, 2018.
The jury ultimately found Raquel guilty on all of the counts against her.
Ultimately, in January of 2019, she is sentenced to 33 years with a mandatory period of 30 years before she's eligible for parole.
After Raquel was convicted, Joey pleads guilty to a charge of aggravated manslaughter and desecration of human remains for disposing of Trupel's body, and the judge ultimately sentences him to 40 years in prison. They're where they deserve to be. You know, she probably wouldn't have pulled the trigger herself, but Joey would never have done this without Raquel.
Love can make people do a lot of crazy things. Love can make people do anything that they put their mind to over it.
I want the world to remember Trupel for his heart and for his generosity and the fun person that would just always be there if you needed him. I want him to be remembered for being a great friend in every aspect, and he will be missed.
It began with a body that almost disappeared into the landscape. Not hidden beneath concrete, not buried deep in the forest, just abandoned where rushing water, thick blackberry bushes, and silence could do the work. A teenage girl lay face down along the muddy bank of Washington State's Green River, her identity unknown to passing strangers, her story swallowed by the current that never stopped moving. It looked like another tragedy, another forgotten victim. But detectives standing at that riverbank in the summer of 1982 had no way of knowing they were looking at the opening chapter of what would become one of the largest serial murder investigations in American history. The Green River did not reveal one secret. It revealed many. Within days, another body surfaced. Then another. Then another. Women and girls kept appearing in shallow water, wooded ravines, abandoned fields, and forgotten stretches of wilderness south of Seattle. Some had been missing for weeks, others for months. Every discovery widened the nightmare. Every recovery raised the same terrifying question. How many more were out there? Fear spread through King County faster than any official warning could contain it. Newspaper headlines screamed about a killer hunting young women. Television broadcasts interrupted regular programming with updates from police. Parents refused to let daughters travel alone after dark. Taxi drivers began refusing certain late-night fares. Truck stops, motels, and downtown streets buzzed with whispers that someone was stalking society's most vulnerable people while remaining completely invisible. The victims shared painful similarities. Many were teenagers or very young women. Several had run away from difficult homes. Some survived through prostitution. Others drifted between shelters, cheap motels, and unfamiliar neighborhoods where disappearing could happen without immediate notice. Their lives often unfolded on the margins of society, making them easy to overlook until someone finally realized they had not returned. That realization came too late. Investigators quickly recognized a horrifying pattern. The killer appeared to target women who could be approached without raising suspicion. A familiar face, an ordinary pickup truck, a casual conversation, a promise of money, a short ride, then silence. Nobody saw the violence. Nobody heard screams. The women simply vanished. When bodies were recovered, many had been left with disturbing consistency. They were often discovered in clusters rather than isolated locations. Some showed evidence of manual strangulation. Others had been deliberately positioned after death. Detectives noticed signs suggesting the killer occasionally returned to the bodies long after the murders themselves, an unsettling possibility that hinted at ritual behavior rather than impulsive violence. If true, they were hunting someone who revisited his crimes. Someone comfortable walking back into death. By late summer, investigators faced an impossible reality. This was no longer a series of unrelated homicides. It was the work of a serial killer. The task force grew almost overnight. Detectives from local agencies joined forces with state investigators. The Federal Bureau of Investigation provided behavioral analysts and technical assistance. Maps covered entire walls inside command centers. Colored pins marked every body recovery, every disappearance, every witness sighting. Telephone lines never stopped ringing. Thousands of tips poured in from frightened citizens convinced they had seen suspicious men, suspicious vehicles, suspicious conversations. Most tips led nowhere. Every dead end consumed precious hours. The killer remained free. The geography itself became another enemy. South King County was a patchwork of rivers, forests, gravel pits, logging roads, industrial areas, and isolated clearings. A person familiar with the region could disappear within minutes. Thick vegetation concealed evidence. Wildlife scattered remains. Time worked in favor of whoever committed the murders. Meanwhile, families waited for impossible phone calls. Some mothers searched shelters every evening. Some fathers drove endless miles hoping to spot familiar faces. Brothers and sisters checked hospitals, county jails, and homeless camps before finally reporting loved ones missing. Hope slowly transformed into dread. Then came another recovery. And another. Every new victim forced detectives back to maps already covered with red circles. Patterns emerged. The killer seemed confident. He chose disposal sites with remarkable familiarity. Bodies appeared near highways, but remained hidden from casual view. Some locations required knowledge of logging trails or undeveloped land. Others suggested someone comfortable spending time outdoors without attracting attention. Investigators wondered whether he worked in construction, or drove trucks, or delivered goods, or simply spent years exploring these roads. The possibilities multiplied faster than evidence. Witnesses described pickup trucks in different colors. Some remembered seeing a calm man speaking politely with young women. Others recalled nothing at all. Sketch artists produced faces that resembled thousands of ordinary men. Every lead created more questions than answers. Then one witness changed everything. A young woman reported surviving an encounter with a man who had attempted to strangle her after offering money for sex. She escaped and described her attacker in remarkable detail. Detectives listened carefully, hoping this would finally expose the monster dominating headlines across Washington. But identifying a stranger from a single encounter proved painfully difficult. The description matched countless local men. Investigators continued collecting names. Thousands of them. The suspect list exploded. Every individual required interviews, background checks, employment records, vehicle information, criminal histories, and alibis. Resources stretched thin. Pressure mounted from every direction. Politicians demanded progress. Families demanded answers. Journalists demanded transparency. Police leaders demanded arrests. Yet the murders continued. The killer appeared untouched by growing attention. If anything, he seemed to adapt. Body recovery sites shifted. Time gaps changed. Victims still disappeared. Some detectives feared he monitored media reports, learning how investigators operated and adjusting accordingly. Others believed he simply understood police limitations better than anyone expected. Behavioral specialists attempted to construct the mind behind the murders. They believed the offender was organized, methodical, comfortable speaking with strangers, likely employed, able to blend effortlessly into everyday life. He probably looked ordinary. That possibility frightened everyone, because ordinary people lived everywhere. The task force interviewed acquaintances of victims repeatedly. Friends described dangerous clients. Family members mentioned controlling boyfriends. Other sex workers shared stories about customers who inspired immediate fear. The same names surfaced more than once, then disappeared beneath mountains of competing information. One suspect attracted unusual attention. He had been seen speaking with several victims. His vehicle resembled descriptions from witnesses. He volunteered information to investigators without being asked. He even agreed to questioning. For a brief moment, detectives wondered if their search had ended. It had not. The evidence available during the early 1980s could not conclusively connect him to the murders. Polygraph examinations, witness statements, and physical observations pointed in conflicting directions. Investigators kept his name active, but lacked the proof necessary to move forward. Frustration consumed the investigation. Every failure deepened public fear. Every week without an arrest suggested the killer might strike again. Volunteers searched wooded areas carrying sticks to push aside thick undergrowth. Helicopters scanned remote terrain from above. Dive teams entered cold water searching for hidden remains. Cadaver dogs worked through forests already picked apart by earlier searches. Sometimes they found victims. Sometimes only discarded clothing. Sometimes nothing. Autumn arrived. Leaves covered the ground where evidence might have rested only days before. Rain turned dirt roads into mud. Cold weather slowed decomposition but complicated searches. Nature itself became an accomplice. Inside evidence rooms, detectives preserved every fiber, every hair, every fragment collected from recovery sites. Forensic science had limitations unimaginable by today's standards. DNA profiling capable of identifying offenders had not yet become an investigative reality. Detectives stored evidence anyway, hoping future technology might unlock secrets impossible to reveal in the present. It was an act of faith. No one knew whether science would ever catch up. Outside police headquarters, memorials continued growing. Flowers. Photographs. Handwritten notes. Candles flickering against cold evening air. Many victims had lived difficult lives, yet in death they became daughters again, sisters again, friends again. Communities that had once ignored them suddenly confronted uncomfortable questions about vulnerability, addiction, exploitation, and the ease with which entire groups of people could disappear without immediate public alarm. The Green River murders exposed more than one killer. They exposed invisible lives. As winter approached, investigators believed the body count almost certainly exceeded the number already recovered. Missing person files continued arriving from families desperate for answers. Detectives compared dental records, clothing descriptions, jewelry, scars, and fingerprints whenever possible, trying to give names back to those found in silence. Each identification brought both relief and devastation. One mystery ended. Another funeral began. Still, somewhere beyond police lines and newspaper headlines, the man responsible woke each morning, drove familiar roads, exchanged ordinary conversations, perhaps greeted neighbors with a smile, perhaps attended work without attracting the slightest suspicion. He carried a secret larger than the investigation chasing him. He understood something detectives could only fear. He knew exactly where every victim had taken her final breath. And he knew the search had only just begun. The investigation entered its second year under a cloud of exhaustion that settled over every detective assigned to the case. Every morning began the same way. Fresh reports, new missing persons, more anonymous tips, maps crowded with colored pins, coffee gone cold before anyone remembered to drink it. The Green River Task Force had grown into one of the largest homicide investigations the Pacific Northwest had ever seen. Yet despite thousands of interviews and countless hours in the field, the killer remained nothing more than a shadow moving between headlines. He had no confirmed face, no confirmed vehicle, no confirmed occupation, only a pattern of death that continued to expand. By early 1983, investigators were no longer asking whether additional victims existed. They assumed they did. The real question was where they would be found. Search teams spent weeks combing dense forests surrounding South King County. Volunteers formed long lines across muddy hillsides, walking shoulder to shoulder through blackberry thickets that tore clothing and skin. Mounted officers searched logging roads inaccessible to patrol cars. Helicopters drifted overhead, scanning ravines hidden beneath towering evergreens. Cadaver dogs zigzagged across remote clearings where sunlight barely reached the ground. Sometimes they found bones, sometimes clothing, sometimes nothing more than scattered personal belongings that hinted someone had once stood there before vanishing forever. Each discovery forced investigators back into the same grim routine. Photograph the scene. Collect every fragment. Measure every distance. Mark every tree. Search again. The murder sites themselves began revealing uncomfortable truths. Many victims had not been killed where they were discovered. Soil samples, vegetation, and the positioning of remains suggested their bodies had been transported after death. Whoever committed these crimes appeared calm enough to drive with a body inside his vehicle before carefully selecting a disposal site. That detail disturbed investigators more than almost anything else. It meant the killer possessed extraordinary confidence. He believed he would not be stopped. He believed no one would notice. And until now, he had been right. Behavioral analysts studying the case concluded the offender demonstrated remarkable organization. He selected victims who were less likely to trigger immediate missing person investigations. He avoided dramatic crime scenes that might produce witnesses. He disposed of bodies in isolated locations familiar enough for repeated visits while remaining difficult for search crews to locate. This was not uncontrolled violence. It was calculated. Every decision reduced risk. Every movement increased his chances of escaping. Detectives also noticed something increasingly difficult to ignore. Several body recovery sites clustered within relatively small geographic areas. Instead of scattering victims randomly across Washington, the killer often returned to regions he already knew. Whether these places held personal meaning or simply offered privacy remained uncertain. But investigators became convinced they were dealing with someone deeply familiar with South King County's back roads, construction sites, riverbanks, and undeveloped land. Someone local. Someone who blended into ordinary life. Public anxiety intensified with every evening news broadcast. Parents adjusted household routines. Young women traveled together whenever possible. Taxi companies warned drivers to remain alert. Community organizations distributed safety information at schools, shopping centers, and churches. Yet despite constant warnings, people still disappeared. One victim would vanish after accepting a ride. Another after leaving work. Another while trying to survive another difficult night on the streets. Many families later described the same unbearable moment. The phone stopped ringing. Plans were missed. Birthdays passed. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Hope slowly transformed into a different kind of waiting. The waiting for confirmation. Inside interview rooms, detectives questioned hundreds of men whose names surfaced through tips, witness accounts, or criminal histories. Every interview followed similar patterns. Where were you that night? Do you recognize this woman? Can anyone verify your location? Have you ever visited these roads? Some suspects became angry. Others laughed. Some volunteered too much information. Some barely spoke at all. Investigators compared fingerprints, employment records, vehicle registrations, military backgrounds, hunting licenses, and prior arrests. Thousands of pages accumulated inside filing cabinets, already overflowing with reports. The workload became overwhelming. One detective later remarked that every promising lead seemed to produce 5 more questions. Nothing stayed simple. Among the growing list of individuals attracting attention was a man named Gary Leon Ridgway. At first glance, he hardly seemed remarkable. He worked steadily. He lived an ordinary life. Co-workers generally described him as quiet rather than threatening. He attended church at different periods of his life. Neighbors saw nothing that immediately suggested extraordinary violence. If anything, he blended almost perfectly into the surrounding community. But investigators kept encountering his name. Witnesses placed him in areas connected to several victims. Some women recalled interactions with him. One survivor described a frightening encounter with a man whose appearance strongly resembled Ridgway after escaping an attempted strangulation. None of those details proved murder. Yet together they demanded attention. Detectives interviewed him. He denied involvement. He appeared cooperative. He answered questions. He agreed to undergo a polygraph examination. The results raised concerns but stopped short of delivering definitive proof. Like polygraph tests in general, they could not establish guilt on their own. Investigators remained suspicious, but suspicion could not support criminal charges. Physical evidence presented another obstacle. Hair comparisons lacked certainty. Fiber analysis suggested possibilities rather than conclusions. Blood typing could eliminate some suspects, but rarely identified one individual. The forensic science available during the early 1980s simply could not answer the questions detectives most desperately wanted solved. So the investigation continued. Months turned into years. The killer continued living somewhere beyond the reach of probable cause. One of the most unsettling discoveries involved the treatment of victims after death. Evidence indicated that some remains had been moved. In certain cases, investigators believe the offender may have returned to body disposal sites weeks or even months later. Such behavior suggested a psychological attachment extending beyond the murders themselves. Criminal profilers recognized this as deeply significant. Returning to victims increased the risk of capture, yet some offenders accepted that danger because it fulfilled emotional or compulsive needs. If that assessment proved correct, detectives reasoned the Green River Killer possessed an extraordinary level of control over fear. He willingly revisited places connected to his worst crimes. That realization transformed search strategies. Instead of merely locating remains, investigators began watching known recovery areas whenever resources allowed. Surveillance teams monitored isolated roads. Patrol officers increased nighttime presence near previous dump sites. Hidden observation posts remained active for hours. Nothing happened. The forests remained silent. The killer never appeared. Or perhaps he noticed the surveillance before anyone noticed him. Media coverage reached extraordinary levels. National newspapers carried updates. Television documentaries explored theories. Talk shows debated police strategy. Psychologists speculated about the offender's personality. Some residents became convinced the killer drove a truck. Others insisted he wore a uniform. Rumors spread faster than verified facts. Almost every suspicious man became someone's suspect. Almost every unsolved disappearance became linked to the Green River investigation. Detectives struggled to separate genuine evidence from public panic. False confessions complicated matters further. Dozens of individuals contacted law enforcement claiming responsibility for the murders. Some suffered severe mental illness. Others sought attention. A few appeared frighteningly knowledgeable before investigators realized they had simply repeated information already published in newspapers. Each confession demanded careful review. Each ultimately collapsed. Meanwhile, victim identification remained painfully slow. Some remains consisted only of partial skeletal elements exposed after months in the wilderness. Forensic anthropologists reconstructed biological profiles using age estimates, dental work, healed fractures, and personal effects recovered nearby. Missing person reports from across Washington and neighboring states were compared repeatedly against new discoveries. Families waited years before receiving answers. Some never received complete certainty. The emotional toll on investigators became impossible to ignore. Experienced homicide detectives who had spent careers examining violent crime admitted privately that this case felt different. The numbers alone overwhelmed conventional investigative methods. Every recovered victim represented not only another homicide, but another family demanding justice, another media conference, another review of evidence already stretching beyond manageable limits. Sleep became irregular. Marriages suffered. Some officers transferred away from the task force. Others refused to leave despite frustration that bordered on obsession. For many, the Green River Killer ceased being merely a suspect. He became the unfinished business that followed them home every night. By the mid-1980s, investigators had assembled an enormous archive documenting virtually every conceivable lead. Hundreds of potential suspects had been evaluated. Thousands of vehicles had been examined. Tens of thousands of reports filled storage rooms. Yet one critical element remained missing. Evidence strong enough to survive a courtroom. Without it, the investigation stood frozen between certainty and proof. Detectives believed they understood the killer's hunting grounds. They believed they understood his victim selection. They believed they understood aspects of his psychology. But belief was not enough. Every prosecutor asked the same question. Can you prove it? The answer remained painfully incomplete. As years passed, public attention slowly shifted toward newer crimes. Television crews stopped arriving as frequently. Headlines became less dramatic. Younger residents grew up knowing the Green River murders as an infamous mystery rather than a developing emergency. For victims' families, however, nothing changed. Birthdays still arrived. Empty chairs still waited during holidays. Photographs still occupied living room shelves. Every anniversary reopened wounds that had never truly healed. Some parents died before learning what happened to their daughters. Others continued speaking with detectives decade after decade, refusing to surrender hope that one day someone would finally be held accountable. Inside climate-controlled evidence storage rooms, boxes gathered dust. Clothing remained carefully sealed. Hair samples stayed preserved. Tiny biological traces collected years earlier waited inside envelopes labeled with case numbers that few people still remembered. To many investigators, those boxes represented failure. To a handful of forensic scientists looking toward the future, they represented possibility. Technology was changing. Methods once considered impossible were beginning to emerge inside research laboratories. Few people could yet imagine that the smallest invisible stain preserved on forgotten evidence might someday identify a killer who had successfully hidden behind ordinary life for nearly 2 decades. And somewhere beyond the walls of every police station, Gary Ridgway continued waking before dawn, driving familiar roads, speaking with coworkers, returning home each evening, carrying a secret that no laboratory of the 1980s possessed the power to uncover. The investigation had narrowed its gaze more than once in his direction, only to watch certainty slip away for lack of proof. The case remained open. The victims continued to accumulate in official records, and the man many detectives quietly suspected walked freely through a world that still had no idea how close it had already come to the truth. Years passed, but the Green River investigation never truly grew cold. It simply settled into a different rhythm, less visible to the public, yet relentless behind the walls of evidence rooms and detective bureaus. The television cameras had largely disappeared. The emergency press conferences became less frequent. New crimes captured national attention. But for the investigators who refused to let go, every file remained open. Every unidentified bone remained a question waiting for an answer, and every missing woman remained a promise that had yet to be fulfilled. By the late 1980s, the task force faced a difficult reality. The murders had slowed dramatically. Whether the killer had stopped, moved away, changed his behavior, or simply become more careful, no one could say with certainty. The decline in newly discovered victims offered little comfort. Detectives understood one unsettling truth better than anyone else. Serial killers rarely stop because they suddenly develop remorse. Something changes. Age, illness, fear, imprisonment for another crime, or a deliberate decision to adapt. The uncertainty haunted every discussion inside the command center. Had they unknowingly frightened the killer into retirement? Or was he still killing somewhere else under an entirely different pattern? No one had an answer. The Green River files continued to expand. Every recovered victim required forensic review. Every unidentified set of remains demanded comparison against missing person reports from across the country. Investigators traveled to neighboring states, revisiting disappearances that might have been connected. Some similarities proved compelling. Others dissolved under closer examination. The boundaries of the investigation became increasingly difficult to define. Was the Green River killer responsible only for murders in King County? Or had he crossed state lines? Could victims have disappeared in Oregon, California, elsewhere? The questions multiplied faster than the evidence. Meanwhile, the suspect list evolved. Thousands of names had entered the files over the years, but only a small number continued attracting serious attention. Among them, Gary Leon Ridgway remained impossible to ignore. His name surfaced again and again. Each time detectives reviewed witness statements, they found reasons not to eliminate him. He had frequented areas where several victims had last been seen. His pickup truck resembled descriptions provided by multiple witnesses. Women involved in street prostitution had identified him as someone who solicited them. One surviving victim had described an attacker whose appearance strongly resembled his. Individually, none of these details proved murder. Collectively, they refused to disappear. Detectives interviewed Ridgway more than once. He remained calm, soft-spoken, cooperative. He denied every accusation. He explained his routines. He answered questions without obvious panic. To investigators, his composure was both reassuring and deeply unsettling. Experienced homicide detectives often expected deception to reveal itself through inconsistency, nervousness, or contradiction. Ridgway displayed remarkably little of any. He appeared almost painfully ordinary. That ordinariness became one of the greatest obstacles in the case. Neighbors described him as quiet. Coworkers knew him as dependable. Employers saw a reliable worker who arrived on time. Nothing about his public life resembled the monstrous figure dominating newspaper headlines. Yet history had already taught investigators a painful lesson. Some of the world's most prolific serial killers had hidden behind ordinary routines. Normal jobs, normal marriages, normal conversations. The contrast between appearance and reality could be terrifying. Investigators dug deeper into Ridgway's personal history. They examined previous arrests, traffic violations, employment records, financial information, relationships, Military service. They interviewed former wives, acquaintances, co-workers, and anyone who might reveal violent tendencies hidden beneath his everyday life. Certain details caught their attention. Ridgway had reportedly shown unusual interest in prostitutes over many years. He admitted paying for sex. He had been questioned regarding violent encounters with women. In one earlier incident, a woman reported surviving an attack after a customer attempted to strangle her. Again, suspicion increased. Again, proof remained elusive. The limitations of forensic science continued frustrating investigators. DNA technology existed only in its infancy. The revolutionary methods that would later transform criminal investigations had not yet become widely available. Most laboratories lacked the ability to generate meaningful genetic profiles from degraded biological evidence collected years earlier. Detectives preserved everything they could, believing future advances might someday succeed where contemporary science failed. That decision would eventually prove historic. But at the time, it felt like placing hope inside sealed cardboard boxes. Throughout the late 1980s and into the early 1990s, investigators revisited crime scenes repeatedly. Some disposal sites were searched years after the original recoveries using improved mapping techniques. New remains occasionally emerged as erosion, construction projects, or changing landscapes exposed evidence previously hidden beneath vegetation. Each recovery reopened old wounds. Families received another phone call, another identification, another funeral delayed by years of uncertainty. For forensic anthropologists, every fragment mattered. A single bone could establish identity. A tooth could preserve dental evidence. A strand of hair might one day become invaluable. Nothing was discarded. Nothing was considered too small. The Green River Files became an archive of patience. Elsewhere, the science of criminal investigation was quietly entering a revolution. Researchers around the world were refining DNA profiling at remarkable speed. What had once required large biological samples now demanded only microscopic traces. Laboratories developed increasingly sophisticated techniques capable of extracting genetic information from evidence long considered unusable. Police agencies across the United States watched these developments with growing optimism. Cold cases that had defeated investigators for decades suddenly appeared vulnerable. Evidence had not changed. Science had. Within the Green River Task Force, discussions increasingly centered on one possibility. Could preserved biological evidence finally identify the killer? The answer depended upon technology still evolving. Years earlier, investigators had collected microscopic samples from several victims. Some stains were almost invisible. Others had degraded over time. Conventional testing produced little. But new DNA methods promised far greater sensitivity. The challenge became preserving evidence until laboratories possessed sufficient capability. Patience once again became the investigation's greatest weapon. While science advanced, detectives continued building circumstantial cases against leading suspects. Ridgway remained under periodic surveillance. His movements were observed. His employment continued. His family life appeared stable. He committed no obvious mistake. No dramatic confession emerged. No eyewitness suddenly identified him beyond doubt. If he truly was the Green River Killer, he displayed extraordinary discipline. Many investigators wondered whether he understood exactly how close police had come. Or perhaps he simply believed they had nothing. The passage of time worked in contradictory ways. Witness memories faded. Vehicles were sold. Documents disappeared. People moved away. Some potential witnesses died before ever being re-interviewed. Yet biological evidence remained frozen in storage, immune to failing memory. Unlike human recollection, DNA did not forget. National attention occasionally returned whenever anniversaries of the murders approached. Journalists revisited the story, interviewing detectives who had devoted years of their careers to the investigation. The same question always surfaced. Will this case ever be solved? Most investigators answered cautiously. They refused to promise success. But privately, optimism slowly returned. Not because they had discovered new witnesses. Not because a suspect had confessed. Because science was beginning to catch up with the killer. Across the country, other cold cases were experiencing remarkable breakthroughs. Decades-old murders suddenly ended with arrests based on DNA recovered from evidence once believed worthless. Every success strengthened confidence inside the Green River Task Force. If another laboratory could solve a 20-year-old murder, why not theirs? Behind the scenes, forensic specialists carefully selected evidence most likely to contain preserved biological material. The process required extraordinary caution. Many samples could never be tested twice. A mistake might permanently destroy irreplaceable evidence collected from victims years earlier. Every decision carried enormous weight. Technicians worked under strict contamination controls. Documentation became meticulous. Chain of custody records were reviewed repeatedly. The investigation had reached a point where scientific precision mattered as much as detective work. Finally, the long-awaited opportunity arrived. Advances in DNA profiling had matured enough for previously collected evidence to undergo meaningful analysis. Investigators submitted carefully preserved samples. Then they waited. Weeks became months. Laboratories performed repeated examinations to ensure accuracy. Results required verification. No one wanted another false lead. No one wanted hope built upon uncertain science. Inside police headquarters, anticipation mixed with anxiety. Veteran detectives who had spent decades chasing the Green River Killer understood the significance of this moment. If the DNA failed, the investigation might remain unsolved indefinitely. If it succeeded, everything could change overnight. When preliminary findings began reaching investigators, conversations inside the task force shifted immediately. The evidence pointed in one direction. Repeatedly. Independently. Different samples collected from different victims produced results that converged upon the same individual. The probability of coincidence became astronomically small. For years, detectives had carried suspicion without certainty. Now, for the first time, science appeared ready to bridge that gap. The name waiting at the end of those laboratory reports was one investigators already knew better than almost anyone. Gary Leon Ridgway, the quiet truck painter, the cooperative interview subject, the ordinary neighbor, the man who had lived for years beneath the weight of suspicion while continuing to walk free. Detectives stared at laboratory reports they had dreamed of seeing for nearly 2 decades. They knew better than to celebrate too early. DNA evidence demanded careful confirmation. Legal standards required exhaustive review. Every procedure had to withstand courtroom scrutiny. Every conclusion had to survive challenges from defense attorneys. The investigation that had consumed thousands of officers, millions of dollars, and 20 years of relentless effort was approaching its most critical moment. Somewhere beyond the walls of the crime laboratory, Gary Ridgway continued living his routine life, unaware, or perhaps fully aware, that the microscopic traces he had unknowingly left behind decades earlier were finally beginning to speak louder than every denial, every interview, every unanswered question that had kept the Green River Killer hidden in plain sight for almost 20 years. For nearly 2 decades, the Green River Killer had survived every obstacle law enforcement placed in his path. Search warrants had failed. Witnesses had fallen short. Polygraph examinations had raised suspicions without producing certainty. Thousands of interviews had consumed years of investigative work. Yet the man many detectives quietly believed was responsible still drove to work every morning. collected his paycheck, returned home each evening, and lived a life so remarkably ordinary that strangers passed him without a second glance. Now that ordinary life was beginning to fracture. The breakthrough did not arrive with flashing police lights or a dramatic confession. It arrived inside a laboratory. Microscopic biological evidence preserved since the early 1980s had survived the passage of time far better than anyone expected. Forensic scientists extracted DNA profiles from carefully stored evidence connected to multiple victims. The techniques available at the beginning of the investigation had never possessed this level of precision. What detectives had hoped for years earlier had finally become reality. The results demanded caution. Every analysis was repeated. Independent examinations verified the findings. Quality control procedures eliminated contamination. Laboratories followed strict protocols because investigators understood the enormous consequences of what they were seeing. The DNA profiles consistently pointed toward the same man, Gary Leon Ridgway. Veteran detectives who had spent much of their careers pursuing the Green River Killer reacted with restrained disbelief. Many had suspected Ridgway since the early years of the investigation. They remembered interviewing him. They remembered watching opportunities slip away because forensic science simply had not advanced far enough. Now science had caught up, but suspicion transformed into evidence only if investigators proceeded carefully. The task force immediately began reviewing every aspect of Ridgway's life once again. Nothing could be overlooked. They examined employment records stretching back years, vacation schedules, vehicle ownership, residential history, relationships, known travel, financial records, previous interviews. Every document was compared against timelines involving victims who had disappeared decades earlier. Patterns emerged with increasing clarity. Ridgway had repeatedly been in locations associated with victim disappearances. He routinely traveled roads connecting known recovery sites. His work schedule frequently aligned with periods when victims vanished. None of those facts alone established guilt. Together with the DNA evidence, however, they formed an increasingly powerful picture. Investigators understood another critical challenge. If Ridgway realized police possessed new forensic evidence, he might flee. He might destroy additional evidence. He might refuse further cooperation. Or worse, if additional victims remained undiscovered, crucial information could disappear forever. Every move required patience. Surveillance intensified. Unmarked vehicles quietly monitored his daily routine. Investigators observed his habits without attracting attention. He appeared unchanged. He continued working as a truck painter at Kenworth. Coworkers noticed nothing unusual. He followed familiar routines. He spoke with neighbors. He purchased groceries. He blended into suburban life exactly as he had for years. Watching him became psychologically difficult for many detectives. They knew the laboratory results. They believed they were observing one of America's most prolific serial killers. Yet outwardly, nothing separated him from countless other middle-aged men heading to work before sunrise. The contrast was almost impossible to comprehend. Behavioral analysts revisited their earlier assessments. Ridgway had always appeared to embody the profile developed years before. Organized, methodical, socially functional, capable of appearing trustworthy, comfortable approaching strangers, able to compartmentalize unimaginable violence while maintaining a routine existence. The profile had not been perfect. Few ever are. But in retrospect, it had captured something essential. The killer was hiding inside normality. Investigators also reconsidered statements made by surviving victims and witnesses decades earlier. One woman who escaped an attempted strangulation had described an attacker whose physical appearance closely resembled Ridgway. Another witness recalled seeing a pickup truck similar to his near one victim shortly before she disappeared. Additional reports documented encounters between Ridgway and women working along Pacific Highway South. Individually, those accounts had never carried enough weight. Combined with DNA evidence, they gained entirely new significance. Still, prosecutors demanded absolute certainty. The stakes could not have been higher. If investigators moved too quickly and failed, they might lose their opportunity forever. The evidence underwent another exhaustive review. Every laboratory procedure faced scrutiny. Defense attorneys would undoubtedly challenge the science. Every chain of custody document had to be flawless. Every forensic technician who handled the evidence could eventually testify. Nothing was left to chance. Meanwhile, detectives quietly explored another possibility. If Ridgway believed investigators remained uncertain, perhaps he would continue talking. He had previously cooperated. He had answered questions. He had attempted to appear helpful. Would he do so again? Or had he sensed the investigation closing around him? Surveillance teams saw little indication of panic. Ridgway continued living according to predictable routines. He attended work, visited stores, maintained ordinary conversations. If anxiety existed beneath the surface, he concealed it remarkably well. Some investigators wondered whether years of avoiding capture had convinced him he was untouchable. Perhaps he believed the evidence had deteriorated beyond usefulness. Perhaps he trusted that memories had faded. Perhaps he simply underestimated how rapidly forensic science had evolved. Whatever his assumptions, time was no longer working in his favor. Inside evidence rooms, detectives reopened boxes untouched for years. Photographs faded slightly with age. Evidence bags remained carefully sealed. Handwritten notes from investigators who had since retired or even died were reviewed line by line. Some detectives experienced an emotional moment reading reports written decades earlier. Colleagues who never lived to see the breakthrough had documented observations that now appeared remarkably insightful. The investigation became a bridge across generations of law enforcement. Young forensic scientists built upon evidence preserved by detectives who had begun the case in 1982. Every person who refused to discard a tiny sample of biological material had unknowingly contributed to this moment. The Green River investigation had become a testament to persistence. Technology had changed. Commitment had not. As prosecutors prepared legal strategy, another question emerged. How many victims could be proven in court? Investigators strongly believed Ridgway had killed far more women than available evidence could establish beyond reasonable doubt. Bodies had decomposed. Evidence had disappeared. Some victims had never been recovered. Others lacked sufficient forensic material for modern DNA testing. The legal case would necessarily represent only part of the full story. Families struggled with that reality. Many hoped every disappearance would finally receive answers. Investigators knew certainty would remain impossible in some cases. The wilderness had concealed too much. Time had erased too much. Even if Ridgway were arrested tomorrow, some mysteries might survive forever. As preparations accelerated, detectives studied Ridgway's psychology with renewed intensity. If confronted by overwhelming evidence, would he confess? Would he deny everything? Would he bargain? History offered no reliable prediction. Serial offenders responded differently when finally cornered. Some admitted nothing despite overwhelming proof. Others confessed selectively. A few revealed details known only to investigators. No one knew which path Ridgway would choose. The arrest itself required meticulous planning. Investigators selected a strategy minimizing risk to officers, bystanders, and potential evidence. Surveillance determined his routines. Tactical teams rehearsed procedures. Search warrants awaited execution. Evidence collection specialists prepared to examine homes, vehicles, and personal belongings immediately after custody began. The objective extended beyond arrest. They wanted corroboration. Every additional piece of evidence strengthened the prosecution. Every recovered item potentially connected another victim. Then, on November 30th, 2001, after nearly 20 years of uncertainty, the investigation reached the moment countless detectives had imagined but few truly believed they would witness. Gary Leon Ridgway was arrested. There was no dramatic chase, no exchange of gunfire, no desperate escape attempt. Police took him into custody as methodically as they had built the case against him. Quietly, professionally, deliberately. News of the arrest spread with astonishing speed. Television stations interrupted programming. Newspapers rushed special editions into print. Families of victims received phone calls they had waited decades to hear. Some cried. Some remained skeptical. Others feared disappointment after years of false hope. Investigators understood those emotions. Until a conviction occurred, the journey remained incomplete. Ridgway entered the criminal justice system, maintaining a composed demeanor that surprised many observers. Photographs showed an unremarkable middle-aged man. No visible rage. No theatrical emotion. Nothing resembling the terrifying figure imagined by the public throughout 2 decades of fear. That image unsettled people almost as much as the murders themselves. Evil, it seemed, did not always announce itself. Sometimes it wore work boots. Sometimes it carried a lunchbox. Sometimes it smiled politely at neighbors before disappearing into the ordinary routines of suburban life. Behind interrogation room doors, detectives prepared for what could become the most consequential interview of their careers. They possessed powerful DNA evidence. They possessed years of investigative records. But they still lacked one thing: the complete truth. Only Gary Ridgway knew where every road had ended, where every final conversation had taken place, how many lives had vanished beyond the official count, and whether the Green River Killer's full story was even darker than investigators had feared for nearly 20 years. The interrogation room was almost disappointingly ordinary. A plain table. Several chairs. Neutral-colored walls. A tape recorder waiting to preserve every word. There were no flashing lights, no dramatic confrontations, no cinematic speeches. After nearly 20 years of searching, the investigators finally sat across from the man they believed had haunted the Pacific Northwest longer than any other serial killer in its history. Gary Leon Ridgway entered quietly. His expression revealed almost nothing. He looked tired, older than the photographs detectives remembered from the early years of the investigation, but not frightened. If anything, he appeared strangely resigned, as though he understood exactly why he had been brought into the room. Across the table sat detectives who had devoted decades of their professional lives to the Green River investigation. Some had interviewed Ridgway years earlier. Some had searched forests where victims were discovered. Some had knocked on parents' doors to deliver the worst news imaginable. Now they faced the man who, according to overwhelming DNA evidence, had been hiding in plain sight all along. The first hours unfolded carefully. Investigators did not rush. They understood that confronting an organized offender required patience rather than aggression. Every question was deliberate. Every pause served a purpose. Ridgway answered in a calm voice, denying responsibility, repeating familiar explanations, insisting he had done nothing wrong. The detectives expected exactly that. The evidence, however, spoke with a confidence that no denial could erase. Forensic specialists had identified Ridgway's DNA on evidence connected to multiple victims. Independent laboratory testing had confirmed the findings. Chain of custody records had survived decades of storage. The science was no longer speculative. It was conclusive. When investigators gradually revealed the strength of the forensic evidence, the atmosphere inside the room shifted. Ridgway listened. He asked questions. He appeared to understand that this investigation was different from every previous encounter with law enforcement. For years, detectives had possessed suspicion. Now they possessed proof. The interviews continued over multiple sessions. Investigators avoided emotional arguments. Instead, they focused on facts, victim timelines, vehicle movements, witness statements, forensic reports. The accumulation of evidence created a picture that became increasingly difficult to dispute. Eventually, prosecutors introduced another element into the equation. Washington state still authorized capital punishment at the time. The possibility of seeking the death penalty fundamentally changed the legal landscape. Prosecutors recognized that while DNA connected Ridgway to several murders, many families still lacked answers regarding victims whose cases remained unresolved. The question became strategic. Was the greater goal execution or truth? The proposal was extraordinary. If Ridgway fully cooperated, confessed to additional murders, and led investigators to previously unknown evidence, prosecutors would agree not to pursue the death penalty. Instead, they would seek multiple consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The offer generated intense debate. Some believed the man responsible deserved execution. Others argued that recovering victims and providing answers to grieving families mattered more than any single sentence. For detectives who had spent years searching remote forests, the decision carried profound emotional weight. Many parents still did not know where their daughters had been left. Some victims remained unidentified. Some families had spent decades wondering whether their loved ones had suffered. Only one person possessed those answers: Gary Ridgway. After careful negotiations, Ridgway accepted the agreement. What followed stunned even experienced homicide investigators. The quiet man who had spent years denying involvement began talking. At first, his admissions came cautiously. Then the details multiplied. He admitted picking up women working along Pacific Highway South. He described approaching them in a friendly manner. He often offered money for sex, creating an interaction that appeared routine and non-threatening. Once isolated, he attacked. Most victims died by manual strangulation. Ridgway later explained that strangulation appealed to him because it was quiet. It required no weapon. It attracted little attention. Those admissions horrified detectives. The murders had always appeared methodical. Now they understood just how calculated they had been. Ridgway described selecting locations where interruption was unlikely. He preferred wooded areas, remote access roads, abandoned clearings, construction zones, places he knew well. The forests that investigators had searched for years were not random dumping grounds. They were locations the killer had deliberately chosen because he understood them intimately. As the interviews continued, Ridgway disclosed another deeply disturbing aspect of his crimes. He admitted returning to some body disposal sites after the murders. Investigators had suspected this behavior decades earlier based upon forensic observations. Now the killer himself confirmed it. His explanations revealed a chilling level of emotional detachment. He spoke matter-of-factly, often describing horrific acts with little visible emotion. Detectives later remarked that his calm delivery proved more unsettling than open displays of violence. There was no theatrical hatred, no dramatic anger, only an almost mechanical recollection of murder. Each confession reopened old investigations. Ridgway identified locations where detectives should search again. Search teams returned to forests that had already been examined years earlier. Using information known only to the killer, investigators located additional remains. Every discovery represented another family finally receiving answers. Yet each recovery also reinforced the unimaginable scale of the crimes. The official victim count continued rising. One confession became another. Then another. Ridgway acknowledged responsibility for dozens of murders. He estimated that he had killed far more women than investigators had initially linked to the case. During questioning, he suggested the total exceeded the number prosecutors could ever prove. His own recollections were not always precise. Time had blurred dates, locations, and sequences. Detectives approached every statement carefully. Confession alone was insufficient. Each claim required independent verification whenever possible. Some details matched evidence perfectly. Others remained impossible to confirm because decades had passed. Nevertheless, investigators consistently found that Ridgway possessed knowledge unavailable to the public. He described body locations, victim clothing, crime scene characteristics, information only the killer could reasonably have known. One by one, long-standing mysteries began to unravel. Families who had lived through nearly 20 years of uncertainty suddenly faced a different emotional challenge. The mystery had ended. The grief had not. Parents attended news conferences carrying photographs of daughters who had disappeared while still teenagers. Brothers and sisters listened as investigators explained how advances in DNA technology had solved a case once believed impossible. Many expressed gratitude. Others struggled with anger. Why had it taken so long? The answer lay in the evolution of forensic science. Had the murders occurred a generation later, investigators might have identified Ridgway within months. Instead, detectives in the early 1980s preserved evidence using methods that seemed almost hopeful rather than practical. They stored microscopic biological material without knowing whether future laboratories would ever possess the ability to analyze it. That decision ultimately transformed the case. Inside interview rooms, detectives occasionally noticed flashes of calculation beneath Ridgway's otherwise subdued demeanor. He understood the agreement protecting him from execution. He answered questions. He clarified timelines. He corrected maps. He accompanied investigators to remote locations where victims had been abandoned. Every trip into the woods became another confrontation with the past. Officers walked beside the man responsible while searching landscapes forever associated with unimaginable violence. Some detectives later admitted those journeys ranked among the most emotionally difficult experiences of their careers. Ridgway often appeared surprisingly familiar with terrain despite the passage of decades. He recognized roads, tree lines, riverbanks, gravel pits, construction areas that had changed dramatically since the early 1980s. Memory guided him back to places where countless searchers had once walked without realizing how close they had come to hidden victims. The public struggled to reconcile Ridgway's appearance with the enormity of his crimes. Courtroom sketches and news photographs showed an aging truck painter wearing glasses, speaking quietly, displaying little emotion. He looked ordinary, almost forgettable. That image contradicted popular expectations of what a serial killer should resemble. Yet investigators understood that ordinary appearance had been one of his greatest weapons. Victims had entered his vehicle because he did not initially seem dangerous. Neighbors ignored him because nothing about his daily routine suggested extraordinary violence. Coworkers remembered him for reliability rather than aggression. For nearly 20 years, normality had concealed one of the deadliest predators in American criminal history. As Ridgway's cooperation continued, prosecutors assembled one of the most significant serial murder cases ever presented in Washington state. Every confession, every DNA profile, every recovered victim, every corroborated statement strengthened an already overwhelming body of evidence. The investigation that had begun beside the Green River in 1982 was no longer searching for an unknown killer. It was documenting the full scope of a nightmare that had remained hidden behind the face of an ordinary man. And with every passing interview, detectives realized the official number of victims might never fully capture the true extent of the destruction Gary Ridgway had left scattered across the forests, rivers, and forgotten roads of the Pacific Northwest. The confessions did not come all at once. They unfolded slowly, methodically, almost as if Gary Ridgway were reading from a series of memories that had remained locked away for decades. Investigators quickly realized they were not dealing with a suspect eager to unburden his conscience. There was no visible remorse, no emotional collapse, no dramatic apology. Instead, there was precision. Ridgway answered questions in the same calm tone detectives had heard during earlier interviews years before. He described roads, intersections, parking lots, and wooded trails with remarkable clarity. Dates sometimes escaped him. Victims' names often did not. Faces blurred together after so many years, but the locations where he abandoned their bodies remained etched into his memory. To the investigators, that detail spoke volumes. The women had become interchangeable in his recollections. The disposal sites had not. Armed with Ridgway's information, search teams returned once again to forests that had been combed countless times since the early 1980s. Advances in mapping technology, forensic archaeology, and GPS allowed investigators to search with far greater accuracy than had been possible during the original investigation. Even so, nature had changed dramatically. Trees had matured. Logging operations had altered entire landscapes. New roads crossed areas that had once been isolated wilderness. Seasonal flooding had shifted soil. Animals had scattered skeletal remains across wide distances. Finding evidence after 2 decades required extraordinary patience. Ridgway often rode with investigators to remote locations. He pointed through the windshield. There. Sometimes that single word sent dozens of forensic specialists into dense undergrowth. On several occasions, searchers located human remains in areas identified by Ridgway that had never previously been connected to missing persons. Every discovery validated portions of his confession, while simultaneously reminding investigators how much had remained hidden despite years of intensive searching. Each recovery followed a solemn routine. The area was secured. Photographs documented every detail before anything was disturbed. Forensic anthropologists carefully excavated remains using techniques more commonly associated with archaeological digs than traditional crime scene investigations. Every fragment of bone mattered. Every button, every zipper, every piece of jewelry. Some victims could only be identified through dental records. Others through personal effects preserved beneath layers of soil. DNA testing increasingly played a central role, allowing forensic scientists to confirm identities that would have been impossible to establish during the early years of the investigation. For many families, the phone finally rang after nearly 20 years of silence. The answers they had begged for had finally arrived. The relief, however, came wrapped in unbearable grief. Parents who had refused to give up hope were now forced to confront the certainty they had feared for decades. Some had preserved bedrooms exactly as their daughters had left them. Others had celebrated birthdays every year, believing there was still a chance. Now there would be no reunion, only a burial, only a grave, only the knowledge that the waiting was over. Investigators attended many of those meetings with families. They explained the evidence. They answered difficult questions. Sometimes they simply listened. No amount of investigative success could erase 20 years of uncertainty. For many detectives, those conversations became the emotional center of the entire case. The arrests, the confessions, the courtroom victories. None of them mattered as much as giving a family the truth. As Ridgway continued cooperating, prosecutors faced another extraordinary challenge. How should justice be measured in a case involving so many victims? Traditional homicide prosecutions focused on a single murder. Perhaps two. Occasionally several. The Green River investigation involved dozens. Each victim deserved recognition. Each family deserved acknowledgement. Each life deserved to be remembered individually rather than disappearing into a statistical total. The prosecution carefully assembled charges supported by the strongest available evidence. While investigators believed Ridgway had murdered significantly more women, prosecutors concentrated on cases that could be established beyond a reasonable doubt through a combination of DNA evidence, corroborated confessions, witness testimony, and forensic findings. The distinction was important. Investigators could suspect additional murders. The courtroom required proof. Ridgway ultimately admitted responsibility for killing at least 48 women, making him one of the most prolific confirmed serial killers in United States history. Investigators have long believed the true number may have been higher, but not every confession could be independently verified to the legal standard required for prosecution. That uncertainty continues to shape discussions about the case today. Some victims may never be identified. Some disappearances may never be conclusively linked. The full scope of the crimes may remain forever beyond exact calculation. During questioning, detectives attempted to understand Ridgway's motivations. Why these women? Why so many? Why continue for years? His answers were unsettling not because they were complicated, but because they were so disturbingly ordinary. He described targeting women engaged in prostitution because he believed they were less likely to be immediately reported missing. He believed they represented easier targets. He believed police attention would be slower. He believed he could avoid detection. Those calculations reflected a chilling awareness of social vulnerability. Ridgway exploited circumstances that already placed many of his victims at risk. He counted on delayed investigations. He counted on prejudice. For years, those assumptions helped him evade capture. Investigators also questioned him about his methods. Why strangulation? His response reflected practicality rather than emotion. It was quiet. It required no weapon. It reduced evidence. It gave him control. Listening to those explanations became psychologically exhausting. Experienced homicide detectives later acknowledged that Ridgway rarely displayed the rage often associated with violent offenders. Instead, he described murder almost as a routine process. That emotional detachment disturbed investigators more deeply than anger ever could. Court preparations intensified. Prosecutors organized decades of evidence into a coherent narrative that jurors could understand. Thousands of reports required review. Hundreds of photographs. Forensic laboratory findings. Witness interviews. Search records. Confession transcripts. The Green River files filled entire rooms. Every document represented another step in one of the longest homicide investigations in American history. Media attention returned with extraordinary intensity. Newspapers revisited the early years of the murders. Television stations interviewed retired detectives who had begun the investigation in 1982. Forensic experts explained how DNA technology had transformed criminal justice. Communities across Washington reflected on a nightmare that had shaped an entire generation. People who had been children during the murders were now adults watching the resolution unfold on evening news broadcasts. Many remembered parents warning them never to accept rides from strangers. Many remembered newspaper headlines filled with photographs of missing young women. The Green River Killer had become part of the region's collective memory. Now that memory finally had a name. Despite the overwhelming evidence, investigators remained careful not to exaggerate. They distinguished between murders supported by direct evidence and cases that remained unresolved. That commitment to accuracy reflected years of painstaking investigative discipline. The truth was powerful enough. It required no embellishment. Ridgway himself often struggled to remember precise timelines. Years had blurred together. Victims became difficult for him to separate chronologically. Investigators therefore compared every confession against independent evidence before accepting it. Maps, weather reports, employment records, missing person files. Everything underwent verification. The result was one of the most thoroughly documented serial murder investigations ever assembled. For younger detectives entering law enforcement, the Green River case became a lesson in perseverance. It demonstrated that evidence preserved today might solve crimes decades later. It reinforced the importance of meticulous documentation. It showed that advances in forensic science could transform seemingly hopeless investigations. Most importantly, it proved that patience could succeed where urgency had failed. The detectives who collected tiny biological samples in 1982 had no guarantee those traces would ever become useful. Yet because they preserved them, justice remained possible. As preparations moved toward formal sentencing, one reality became increasingly clear. The legal process could punish Gary Ridgway. It could never fully repair what he had destroyed. Entire families had been permanently altered. Communities had lived with fear for years. Young women whose futures once held limitless possibilities existed now only through photographs, memories, and fading home videos preserved by loved ones. The Green River investigation had finally identified the man responsible. But the cost of reaching that truth could never be measured solely in years, arrests, or convictions. It was measured in lives interrupted, families forever changed, and decades spent searching for answers that, when they finally arrived, carried with them the unbearable weight of everything that had already been lost. When Gary Ridgway finally entered the courtroom to formally acknowledge his crimes, the atmosphere carried none of the excitement often portrayed in fictional crime dramas. There was no applause, no sense of triumph. Victory had come far too late for that. The room was filled instead with quiet grief, restrained anger, and the unbearable awareness that dozens of young women would never walk through the courtroom doors. They existed only in photographs, high school portraits, family snapshots, holiday pictures faded by time, smiling faces that had been frozen decades before their lives were violently interrupted. Ridgway sat quietly before the court. His posture remained composed. His expression revealed little emotion. The contrast between his ordinary appearance and the scale of his admitted crimes remained deeply unsettling. For years, newspapers had described the Green River Killer as an unseen predator haunting the Pacific Northwest. Now that predator wore glasses, spoke softly, and looked remarkably average. Many family members later admitted that this was among the hardest realities to accept. Monsters did not always look like monsters. The prosecution presented the court with an extraordinary agreement. In exchange for complete cooperation, verified confessions, and assistance locating victims, prosecutors would not seek the death penalty. Instead, Ridgway would receive consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The decision continued to divide public opinion. Some believed execution represented the only appropriate punishment. Others agreed with investigators that recovering victims and providing answers carried greater value than pursuing a lengthy capital trial that might never reveal the full extent of the crimes. For the detectives who had spent decades searching forests, the choice remained clear. Truth came first. The courtroom proceedings reflected that philosophy. Instead of focusing solely on punishment, prosecutors carefully documented the identities of the women whose lives had been taken. Each name mattered. Each story mattered. The victims were no longer anonymous statistics. They became daughters, sisters, friends, young women whose futures had been stolen. As the charges were read, the magnitude of the case became impossible to ignore. One murder, then another, and another. The list seemed almost endless. Each count represented a separate life, a separate investigation, a separate family waiting years, sometimes decades, for justice. Ridgway pleaded guilty to 48 counts of aggravated first-degree murder, consistent with the plea agreement. At the time, it was one of the largest guilty pleas involving serial murder in American history. The courtroom remained silent. Many family members stared directly at him. Others could not bear to look. Some clutched photographs. Some held hands. Some simply cried. The legal proceedings moved forward with remarkable precision. Every confession introduced by prosecutors had been carefully corroborated. Every location identified by Ridgway had been investigated. Every available forensic result had undergone repeated review. The strength of the case rested not on one dramatic piece of evidence, but on decades of patient investigative work. DNA, witness testimony, recovered remains, crime scene analysis, employment records, confession details known only to the killer. Together, they formed an overwhelming body of proof. Then came one of the most emotionally powerful moments of the proceedings. Victim impact statements. Family after family approached the court. Parents described empty bedrooms that had remained untouched for years. Brothers recalled searching streets long after police investigations had slowed. Children who had lost mothers spoke about growing up without answers. Some relatives addressed Ridgway directly. Others spoke only to the judge. Their words varied. Their pain did not. Many asked the same question in different forms. Why? Why their daughter? Why their sister? Why their mother? Why so many? Ridgway rarely offered meaningful explanations. His answers remained painfully limited. He admitted responsibility. He acknowledged the murders. But genuine insight into his motivations remained elusive. Psychologists later examined his statements extensively. Most concluded that Ridgway viewed victims less as individuals than as opportunities. That emotional detachment explained much about his behavior. It explained his methodical planning. It explained his calm demeanor. It explained why he often struggled to recall names while remembering body disposal sites with remarkable accuracy. To him, locations mattered more than identities. That realization devastated many families. The women they loved had never become memories to him. They had become objects within a routine. During the hearings, prosecutors emphasized another remarkable aspect of the investigation. Without advances in DNA technology, Ridgway might never have been identified. The evidence collected in the early 1980s had remained preserved for nearly 20 years before science finally possessed the capability to reveal its significance. The case became a landmark example of forensic perseverance. Across the United States, police agencies began reviewing older unsolved murders with renewed optimism. Evidence once considered useless suddenly carried enormous potential. The Green River investigation demonstrated that justice could survive the passage of decades. The courtroom also heard testimony from investigators whose careers had become inseparable from the case. Some had spent nearly 20 years pursuing the same suspect. Others had entered the investigation long after the murders began, inheriting mountains of reports compiled by detectives who had already retired. The case represented an extraordinary collaboration across generations. No single detective solved it. No single laboratory achieved the breakthrough alone. Success emerged because thousands of people refused to abandon the investigation. Outside the courthouse, media organizations from around the world gathered each day. Satellite trucks lined nearby streets. Television crews broadcast live updates. Reporters interviewed criminologists, prosecutors, retired detectives, and victims' families. The Green River case had become more than a regional story. It had become an international symbol of both investigative persistence and the evolving power of forensic science. Public fascination extended beyond the courtroom. People wanted to understand how one man could kill for years without detection. Experts pointed toward multiple factors: victim vulnerability, limitations of forensic technology during the early 1980s, the enormous geographic area involved, the sheer number of investigative leads, Ridgway's ability to appear ordinary. Each factor alone might not have protected him. Together, they delayed justice for nearly 2 decades. Criminal profilers revisited the investigation after the guilty pleas. Many noted that Ridgway differed from popular stereotypes surrounding serial murder. He did not seek publicity. He did not communicate with police. He did not construct elaborate identities. He avoided unnecessary risks whenever possible. His methods reflected efficiency rather than spectacle. That practical approach made him exceptionally difficult to identify. He sought invisibility. For years, he achieved it. Yet even after the guilty pleas, important questions remained unanswered. Investigators believed additional victims might never be found. Ridgway himself acknowledged uncertainty regarding the total number of women he had killed. Time had blurred memories. Evidence had disappeared. Some remains may still lie undiscovered in remote areas of Washington state. That possibility continued troubling detectives long after sentencing. The legal case had concluded. The search for truth had not. Communities across the Pacific Northwest gradually began confronting the broader social lessons exposed by the murders. The investigation highlighted the dangers faced by vulnerable women living on society's margins. It forced difficult conversations regarding missing person investigations, exploitation, addiction, and the unequal attention often given to different victims. Many advocates argued that every missing person deserved the same urgency regardless of occupation or circumstance. The Green River murders became part of that discussion, not only because of their scale, because of what they revealed. As sentencing concluded, the judge imposed multiple consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, ensuring Gary Ridgway would spend the remainder of his life in prison. There would be no release. No return to ordinary life. The truck painter who had quietly blended into suburban Washington for decades would now disappear behind prison walls for the rest of his natural life. Yet even as courtroom doors closed and reporters packed away their cameras, one truth remained impossible to ignore. The legal system had reached its conclusion. The emotional journey for the families never truly would. No sentence could restore birthdays that never happened. No confession could erase years spent searching. No forensic breakthrough could return daughters who had vanished along lonely highways believing they were accepting nothing more than another ordinary ride. Justice had finally arrived, but it had arrived carrying the weight of 20 years of silence, and that silence would continue echoing through every family photograph, every empty chair, and every memory of the women whose lives forever became intertwined with the name the world would never forget, the Green River Killer. The guilty pleas brought legal certainty, but they did not bring the investigation to an immediate end. If anything, the work entered a new and equally demanding phase. Detectives who had spent nearly 20 years trying to identify the Green River Killer now faced a different responsibility, determining the full extent of his crimes, verifying every confession, and ensuring that no victim who could be identified remained forgotten. The task required the same patience that had defined the investigation from the beginning. Every statement Gary Ridgway made had to be tested. Every location he identified had to be searched. Every memory he shared had to be measured against physical evidence, witness accounts, and decades of investigative records. The detectives understood a simple but critical fact. Confessions alone were never enough. A confession could be incomplete. It could be inaccurate. It could even contain deliberate falsehoods. Only evidence could transform a statement into historical fact. Ridgway's interviews continued for months. Investigators spread large topographical maps across conference tables. Roads, rivers, logging trails, construction sites, power line corridors, abandoned gravel pits. The Pacific Northwest had changed dramatically since the early 1980s. Entire neighborhoods now stood where forests once grew. Industrial parks covered land that had once been empty fields. Some roads no longer existed. Others had been widened beyond recognition. Yet Ridgway often recognized the terrain with surprising confidence. He pointed to locations where old roads had once curved through dense woodland. He described landmarks that no longer existed. He recalled isolated clearings hidden decades earlier by thick undergrowth. Those details frequently guided investigators toward areas they otherwise would never have revisited. Forensic search teams returned once again to Washington's forests. This time they carried technologies unavailable during the original investigation. Global positioning system equipment allowed precise documentation of search grids. Digital mapping software recorded excavation sites with extraordinary accuracy. Ground surveys were coordinated more efficiently than ever before. Even so, nature remained an unforgiving adversary. Rain had washed away evidence. Floods had altered riverbanks. Animals had scattered skeletal remains across large areas. Years of decomposition had erased countless forensic clues. The landscape itself had become a silent witness whose memory was steadily disappearing. Searches sometimes lasted days without result. Then a single fragment of bone would emerge beneath layers of leaves and soil. The discovery immediately transformed an ordinary patch of forest into a meticulously documented crime scene. Forensic anthropologists knelt beside the earth with brushes and small excavation tools. Every inch mattered. Every discovery carried the possibility of restoring a victim's identity. Each recovery represented another chapter closing for one family. Some relatives had waited nearly 20 years. Others had passed away before learning what happened to their daughters or sisters. Investigators often reflected on those families during interviews with Ridgway. They reminded him that names still remained missing, that mothers still waited, that graves still stood empty. Whether motivated by the plea agreement or simple calculation, Ridgway continued providing information that helped locate additional remains. His cooperation, however, rarely revealed emotion. He described murder with astonishing detachment. Many detectives later remarked that his calm demeanor never truly changed. There were no dramatic confessions, no visible breakdown, no expressions of profound guilt. He often spoke as though recalling routine events from another lifetime. That emotional distance fascinated forensic psychologists. Experts studying the case concluded that Ridgway displayed an extraordinary ability to compartmentalize his life. He maintained employment, paid bills, married, attended church during portions of his life, visited family, performed ordinary daily tasks. Yet hidden behind that routine existed a second life defined by calculated violence. The coexistence of those two identities challenged many public assumptions about serial offenders. There had been no obvious warning visible to neighbors, no unmistakable signal recognized by co-workers. The Green River Killer had hidden not because he appeared extraordinary. He had hidden because he appeared entirely ordinary. As investigators reconstructed the timeline of the murders, another pattern became increasingly clear. Ridgway often adapted his behavior in response to changing circumstances. When media attention intensified, he appeared to become more cautious. When police increased patrols in one area, he shifted activity elsewhere. He selected locations that reduced the likelihood of interruption. He paid close attention to risk. This adaptability contributed significantly to his ability to avoid capture for so many years. The investigation also revealed how frequently simple chance influences criminal cases. Several encounters had nearly exposed Ridgway long before DNA technology matured. Witnesses had noticed him. Victims had survived attacks. Investigators had interviewed him multiple times. At various moments, the investigation had come remarkably close to identifying him. Yet the decisive piece of evidence always remained just beyond reach. The smallest biological traces, microscopic evidence invisible to the naked eye, ultimately accomplished what years of traditional investigation could not. That realization transformed police training across the country. Evidence preservation became an even greater priority. Crime scene investigators increasingly recognized that today's insignificant sample might become tomorrow's decisive proof. The Green River case became a textbook example, not only because it had been solved through patience. Inside police academies, instructors pointed toward the investigation as evidence that meticulous documentation could outlast technological limitations. Young detectives studied the case to understand the importance of preserving every possible trace. Forensic scientists cited it when discussing the evolution of DNA analysis. Prosecutors referenced it while explaining why unsolved cases should never be abandoned. The investigation influenced an entire generation of criminal justice professionals. Meanwhile, victim advocacy organizations focused attention on another lesson. Many of the women targeted by Ridgway lived difficult lives. Several struggled with addiction. Some engaged in sex work. Others had run away from unstable homes. For years, advocates argued that these circumstances contributed to delayed reporting and inconsistent public attention during the early stages of the investigation. The Green River murders forced uncomfortable conversations about whose disappearances receive immediate urgency and whose are too often overlooked. Those discussions continued decades later. The case changed not only investigative practices, it changed public awareness. Families of the victims also formed lasting connections through shared tragedy. Parents who had never met before the murders found themselves sitting together in courtrooms, memorial services, and community events. They exchanged photographs, shared memories, supported one another through years of uncertainty. Many later described those relationships as one of the few sources of comfort available after unimaginable loss. No family fully understood another's pain. Yet all understood the waiting, the unanswered phone calls, the birthdays without celebration, the holidays marked by absence rather than reunion. Those experiences created bonds that endured long after the legal proceedings concluded. Ridgway himself eventually entered the Washington state prison system to begin serving multiple consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. There would be no release hearings, no opportunity to return to society. His remaining years would be spent behind prison walls. For investigators, however, imprisonment did not erase unanswered questions. Some detectives continued reviewing unresolved disappearances across the Pacific Northwest. Could additional victims still be connected? Had every confession been truthful? Were there locations Ridgway had forgotten or deliberately concealed? The search for complete certainty continued. Retired detectives occasionally returned to consult on new developments. Forensic laboratories periodically re-examined preserved evidence using increasingly sophisticated DNA techniques. Even after conviction, science continued advancing. Methods considered impossible in 2001 became routine years later. The possibility remained that additional answers might still emerge from evidence stored decades earlier. That continuing evolution reflected one of the investigation's most enduring lessons. Justice is not always limited by time. Sometimes it simply waits for knowledge to catch up. As years passed, the Green River murders gradually shifted from active investigation to historical case study. Universities examined the forensic breakthroughs. Behavioral scientists analyzed Ridgway's psychology. Law enforcement agencies incorporated investigative lessons into training programs nationwide. What had once been an unfolding nightmare became one of the most extensively studied serial murder investigations in American history. Yet beneath every academic paper, every forensic lecture, and every documentary remained a far simpler truth. Real women had lost their lives. Real families had spent decades searching. Real detectives had devoted much of their careers to refusing the easy answer that the case could never be solved. Their persistence ensured that the Green River Killer would not remain an anonymous legend whispered through newspaper headlines. He would be identified, held accountable, and remembered not for the ordinary face he presented to the world, but for the extraordinary determination of those who never stopped searching until science, evidence, and perseverance finally converged to expose one of the darkest chapters in the history of the Pacific Northwest. Long after the headlines faded and the courtroom lights dimmed, the Green River investigation continued to cast a shadow far beyond Washington state. It had become more than the story of one serial killer. It had become a case study in how modern homicide investigations evolve, how forensic science can reshape history, and how persistence can overcome obstacles that once seemed impossible to defeat. For the detectives who remained involved, however, the case was never simply about investigative milestones. It was about names. Each victim represented a life interrupted before it had the chance to unfold. Many had been teenagers. Some were mothers. Others had dreams that disappeared long before they had the opportunity to become reality. Investigators often returned to the earliest missing person reports, reading descriptions written by frightened parents decades before. She always called home. She never missed her sister's birthday. She promised she'd be back. Those sentences carried a quiet heartbreak. They reminded everyone involved that before the forensic evidence, before the maps, before the courtroom proceedings, there had been ordinary families living ordinary lives until one day someone failed to come home. As historians and criminologists reviewed the Green River murders, they recognized several factors that had allowed the investigation to stretch across 2 decades. The first was geography. South King County offered countless opportunities to hide evidence. Dense forests bordered highways. Remote logging roads disappeared into miles of wilderness. Riverbanks shifted with seasonal flooding. Construction sites changed the landscape from year to year. The environment itself worked against investigators. Even experienced search teams could walk within feet of human remains without realizing it. The second factor involved timing. The murders began during an era when forensic DNA profiling did not yet exist as a practical investigative tool. Today, a microscopic biological sample may identify a suspect within days. In the early 1980s, that same evidence could only be preserved in hope that future science might eventually unlock its secrets. The Green River case became one of the clearest demonstrations of why evidence preservation matters. Nothing collected by investigators proved insignificant. Every fiber, every hair, every biological trace, each piece of evidence became an investment in technologies that had not yet been invented. Another lesson emerged from the extraordinary cooperation between agencies. The Green River Task Force eventually included local detectives, county investigators, state authorities, FBI personnel, forensic scientists, anthropologists, crime scene specialists, prosecutors, and victim advocates. No single investigator solved the case. No single laboratory solved the case. The resolution came through decades of collaboration. Every generation built upon the work of the previous one. Retired detectives returned to assist younger investigators. Old handwritten notes guided new forensic analyses. Institutional memory became as valuable as technological progress. The investigation demonstrated that solving a major serial murder case often depends upon continuity as much as innovation. Criminal psychologists also continued examining Gary Ridgway's behavior long after his conviction. Unlike several notorious serial offenders who actively sought media attention, Ridgway consistently avoided publicity. He did not send letters to newspapers. He did not contact investigators to boast. He did not create elaborate games designed to challenge police. Instead, he pursued anonymity. His objective appeared simple: continue killing, avoid detection, return to ordinary life. That simplicity made him exceptionally dangerous. His crimes were not driven by a desire for fame. They were driven by opportunity and control. Behavioral experts noted that Ridgway adapted whenever circumstances changed. When law enforcement intensified patrols, he became more cautious. When media coverage increased, he reduced unnecessary risks. When certain locations became dangerous, he selected others. This flexibility distinguished him from offenders whose predictable routines eventually exposed them. Ridgway rarely allowed habit to outweigh caution. For years, that discipline helped him remain invisible. The case also forced law enforcement agencies nationwide to reconsider how missing person investigations involving vulnerable populations were conducted. Many Green River victims lived unstable lives. Some struggled with addiction. Several engaged in sex work. Others had histories of running away from home. Those circumstances sometimes complicated early investigations because disappearances were not always recognized immediately. Over time, policing practices evolved. Agencies increasingly emphasized that every missing person deserved prompt attention regardless of lifestyle, occupation, or personal history. Advocates frequently cited the Green River investigation while arguing for those reforms. The murders revealed painful truths about social vulnerability. Those lessons continue influencing policy today. Families of the victims carried another responsibility: memory. Many became determined that their daughters would never again be reduced to anonymous descriptions or crime statistics. Memorial services emphasized who the women had been before tragedy entered their lives. Favorite songs, childhood photographs, school achievements, personal stories. The goal remained simple: restore individuality. The killer had treated victims as interchangeable. Their families refused to do the same. Several investigators later reflected on the emotional complexity of interviewing Ridgway after his guilty pleas. Unlike many violent offenders portrayed in popular culture, he rarely displayed dramatic emotional reactions. His answers often remained direct, brief, matter of fact. That absence of visible emotion frustrated some detectives. They hoped for insight. Instead, they frequently encountered indifference. Understanding his psychology became less important than documenting the facts. Truth mattered more than explanation. The legal process had already ensured that Ridgway would spend the remainder of his life in prison. The continuing mission focused on history, accuracy, documentation, completeness. Cold case investigators across the United States paid close attention. If DNA could solve the Green River murders after nearly 20 years, what other investigations might still hold hidden answers? Police departments reopened evidence rooms. Unsolved homicides dating back decades underwent new forensic testing. Laboratories developed increasingly sensitive DNA extraction techniques capable of generating profiles from evidence once believed impossible to analyze. The Green River investigation became a source of optimism for families waiting in other cold cases. Not because every mystery would necessarily be solved, because impossible no longer meant impossible forever. Retired members of the task force often emphasized one point during interviews: persistence matters. Many opportunities to abandon the investigation had presented themselves. Budgets tightened. Personnel changed. Public attention faded. Years passed without significant breakthroughs. Yet the evidence remained preserved. The files remained organized. The commitment remained intact. Without that persistence, DNA alone could never have solved the case. Science required investigators willing to protect evidence long enough for technology to catch up. As the years continued, Ridgway remained incarcerated under multiple life sentences without parole. His days became governed by prison routines far removed from the forests and highways that had once defined his hidden world. Occasionally, investigators continued speaking with him in hopes of resolving remaining uncertainties. Some discussions clarified details. Others produced little new information. Memory continued fading. Time affected everyone, even the killer. Whether every victim would ever be identified remained uncertain. Whether every crime would ever be fully documented remained equally unclear. Some mysteries may have disappeared forever beneath changing landscapes and passing decades. That uncertainty remains one of the investigation's final burdens. Even after conviction, complete closure proved impossible. Standing today along the banks of the Green River, the landscape appears remarkably peaceful. Water moves steadily beneath bridges. Birds cross the morning sky. Traffic passes without slowing. Nothing immediately reveals that this ordinary place once became the starting point for one of America's most extensive serial murder investigations. Nature has reclaimed much of what happened. The river continues flowing exactly as it did in 1982. But memory remains. Not within the water. Within the people who refuse to forget. Within investigators who preserved evidence others might have discarded. Within forensic scientists whose work transformed microscopic traces into courtroom proof. Within families who spent decades waiting for answers they feared might never come. And within every future detective who studies the Green River investigation as a reminder that justice sometimes travels an impossibly long road. But when evidence is protected, when determination survives disappointment, and when science continues advancing, even the darkest secrets hidden beneath years of silence can eventually emerge into the light. Even after the convictions, one uncomfortable truth lingered over the Green River case like a persistent fog. The investigation had identified the killer. It had secured guilty pleas. It had recovered many victims. Yet it had never completely answered the question that haunted everyone from detectives to psychologists, from grieving parents to ordinary citizens who had followed the story for decades. How could one man murder for so long without anyone truly seeing him? The answer was not simple. It was a collision of circumstance, technology, human behavior, and calculated deception. Gary Ridgway did not build an elaborate criminal empire. He did not possess extraordinary intelligence in the traditional sense. Investigators who interviewed him repeatedly often described him as an average man whose greatest advantage was patience. He learned routines. He understood risk. He preferred simplicity over complexity. Every unnecessary action created danger. Every predictable habit increased the chance of capture. So he minimized both. That philosophy shaped nearly every aspect of his crimes. He selected victims he believed were less likely to generate immediate, large-scale searches. He used manual strangulation because it required no weapon that could later be recovered. He transported bodies to remote locations where discovery might take weeks, months, or even years. He returned to normal life almost immediately after killing. No dramatic changes. No reckless spending. No sudden disappearances. The transition from murder to ordinary routine became part of his survival strategy. Behavioral experts later described this ability as compartmentalization. To most people, Committing even a single homicide would fundamentally alter every aspect of daily life. Ridgway appeared capable of separating violence from routine with disturbing efficiency. He could finish work, drive through familiar neighborhoods, speak casually with coworkers, return home, then on another day, seek out another victim. That emotional separation remains one of the most unsettling characteristics identified by psychologists studying the case. It challenged long-held assumptions regarding visible signs of guilt. Many people expected murderers to appear nervous, haunted, unstable. Ridgway demonstrated that some offenders could hide behind consistency rather than chaos. The Green River investigation also revealed the extraordinary importance of institutional memory. During nearly 20 years of investigation, detectives retired. Supervisors changed. Forensic methods evolved. Political leadership shifted. Budgets expanded and contracted. Without careful documentation, crucial knowledge could easily have disappeared. Instead, investigators maintained comprehensive records. Every interview, every search, every witness statement, every laboratory report. Future detectives inherited not confusion, but a carefully organized foundation built by those who came before them. The value of that continuity cannot be overstated. When DNA technology finally matured, investigators already possessed decades of meticulously preserved evidence ready for renewed examination. The science alone did not solve the case. The preparation did. Universities soon began including the Green River investigation in criminology and forensic science courses. Students examined the chronology of the murders, the evolution of investigative strategy, the development of DNA profiling, the ethical questions surrounding plea agreements. Should prosecutors negotiate with someone responsible for dozens of murders? Should certainty for families outweigh the pursuit of the harshest possible sentence? There were no universally accepted answers. Supporters of the agreement argued that without Ridgway's cooperation, many victims would likely have remained undiscovered forever. Critics believed allowing him to avoid the death penalty denied full justice. Both perspectives reflected genuine moral concerns. The debate continues today. For many detectives directly involved, however, the answer remained unchanged. Recovering victims mattered. Giving families answers mattered. Truth mattered. Those priorities guided every major decision during the final years of the investigation. The Green River murders also reshaped public understanding of serial crime. During the 1970s and 1980s, popular culture often portrayed serial killers as criminal masterminds possessing almost supernatural intelligence. The reality proved more complicated. Ridgway succeeded not because he was impossible to catch. He succeeded because he operated during a period when forensic limitations, victim vulnerability, and geographical complexity aligned in his favor. Once those advantages disappeared, so did his anonymity. The emergence of DNA technology fundamentally altered the balance between offender and investigator. Microscopic evidence no longer remained silent. It became a witness. Across the United States, cold case units increasingly embraced this new reality. Evidence collected decades earlier returned to laboratories. Thousands of unsolved homicides received renewed attention. Some investigations immediately produced arrests. Others required years of additional work. Many still remain unresolved. Yet the Green River case demonstrated that preserving evidence could preserve hope. Families who had almost accepted permanent uncertainty suddenly witnessed impossible breakthroughs. Victim advocates frequently point to another legacy. The murders forced communities to reconsider whose lives received public attention. Many Green River victims lived difficult and complicated lives. Some struggled with addiction. Some engaged in survival sex work. Others lacked stable housing. Those realities influenced how disappearances were initially perceived by parts of society. Over time, advocacy organizations argued that every missing person deserves equal urgency regardless of personal circumstances. The Green River investigation became a powerful example supporting that principle. A person's vulnerability should never determine the value placed upon finding them. The case also changed how law enforcement approached communication between agencies. Information sharing improved significantly during the decades following the investigation. National databases expanded. Digital record systems replaced many paper files. Missing person reports, unidentified remains, fingerprint databases, and DNA records gradually became more interconnected. While no investigative system can eliminate every failure, the lessons learned from Green River influence reforms extending far beyond Washington state. For the families, however, institutional improvements could never erase personal loss. Years after sentencing, memorial ceremonies continued honoring the victims. Names were read aloud. Flowers placed beside photographs. Candles illuminated quiet evenings where silence often spoke louder than speeches. Some relatives described an enduring conflict between relief and grief. Relief that the killer could never harm another woman. Grief that justice had arrived too late to save those already gone. Many investigators attended those ceremonies whenever possible. Some had known the victims only through case files. Others had met parents repeatedly over decades. The emotional bonds formed during long investigations rarely disappear after convictions. Retirement did not erase memories. Former detectives continued speaking publicly about the importance of preserving evidence, supporting victims' families, and maintaining commitment even when cases appear unsolvable. They often reminded younger officers that the Green River investigation nearly failed many times. Had evidence been discarded? Had files been poorly organized? Had funding disappeared permanently? Had investigators surrendered to frustration? The outcome could have been very different. Persistence became the investigation's defining characteristic. More than 20 years after the first body appeared near the Green River, the case remained one of the most thoroughly documented serial murder investigations in American history. Researchers continue examining its forensic breakthroughs. Psychologists continue analyzing offender behavior. Law enforcement agencies continue drawing investigative lessons from its successes and its failures. Yet beneath every lecture, every documentary, every academic article, and every courtroom transcript remains a simple human reality. Young women disappeared. Families searched. Communities lived in fear. Detectives refused to quit. Scientists refused to stop improving. And eventually, the smallest traces left behind by a killer who believed he had erased every connection became the evidence that finally dismantled nearly 2 decades of carefully constructed secrecy. The Green River Killer had spent years believing the forests would protect him. He believed time would destroy the truth. He believed forgotten victims would remain forgotten forever. In the end, none of those assumptions survived. The forests kept their silence. The victims did not. Their voices returned through science, through evidence, through determination, and through the unwavering refusal of investigators and families alike to allow one of the darkest chapters in American criminal history to disappear beneath the passing years. The Green River still flows. It winds quietly through western Washington, carrying rainwater from the mountains toward the sea, just as it did long before the summer of 1982. Drivers cross its bridges every day without slowing. Children play in nearby parks. Commuter trains pass through the region. Businesses open their doors each morning. Life continues with the remarkable persistence that follows even the darkest chapters of history. Yet for those who remember, the river is no longer just a river. It became the name attached to one of the most devastating serial murder investigations the United States has ever known. More than 2 decades separated the discovery of the first known victims from the moment Gary Ridgway finally admitted responsibility in court. During those years, detectives grew older. Families endured unimaginable uncertainty, and forensic science advanced from a distant possibility to the decisive force that ultimately broke the case. The investigation changed everyone who touched it. Some detectives spent nearly their entire careers pursuing the same offender. Many victims' parents grew old while waiting for answers. Young investigators entered the task force after the murders had already become history, inheriting thousands of reports compiled by officers they had never met. It was not simply one investigation. It became a generational commitment. Looking back, historians often identify the Green River case as a turning point in modern criminal investigation. Not because it introduced DNA technology. Not because it involved an unusually large task force. Not because it dominated national headlines. It became a turning point because it proved something investigators had hoped, but could never previously demonstrate with such clarity. Time does not always protect a killer. For centuries, criminals believed that if they escaped immediate capture, they could eventually disappear into history. The Green River investigation challenged that assumption. Evidence preserved in 1982 identified a murderer in 2001. Microscopic biological traces outlived fading memories, changing landscapes, and retiring detectives. Science became the witness that never forgot. The lessons extended far beyond one serial murder case. Police departments across the United States dramatically expanded cold case investigations. Evidence rooms once viewed as archives became laboratories of possibility. Items collected decades earlier were re-examined using increasingly sophisticated forensic methods. Many families received long-awaited answers because investigators refused to discard evidence that once seemed insignificant. The Green River case helped inspire that transformation. Yet no technological achievement should overshadow the people whose lives gave the case its meaning. The victims were not symbols. They were individuals. Young women with favorite songs, private dreams, childhood memories, complicated lives. Some hoped to reunite with family. Some wanted to escape addiction. Some searched for opportunity. Some simply hoped tomorrow might be better than yesterday. Those futures ended on isolated roads and in quiet forests because they encountered a man who viewed vulnerability as opportunity. One of the enduring tragedies of the Green River murders lies in the social realities surrounding many of the victims. Several lived on the margins of society. Some engaged in sex work to survive. Others struggled with unstable housing or addiction. For years, advocates have argued that those circumstances contributed to delayed recognition when women disappeared. The investigation prompted broader conversations about equality in criminal justice. Does every missing person receive the same urgency? Does every victim receive the same public attention? Those questions remain relevant today. The Green River case continues reminding investigators and communities alike that every life deserves the same determination, regardless of personal circumstance. Gary Ridgway himself has spent the remainder of his life serving multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. His days are now measured by prison routines rather than freedom. He will never again travel the roads where he once hunted victims. He will never return to the forests that concealed his crimes. The man who spent nearly 20 years avoiding accountability now lives under permanent confinement. Yet even that reality cannot fully resolve every question. Investigators have long acknowledged that the precise number of Ridgway's victims may never be known with complete certainty. He pleaded guilty to 48 murders, and he admitted to killing many women over the years. Investigators have publicly stated that they believe additional victims are possible, but not every case can be established to the evidentiary standard required for criminal prosecution. Some remains may never be recovered. Some disappearances may never be conclusively connected. Nature has hidden too much. Time has erased too much. Those unanswered questions remain part of the Green River legacy. For surviving family members, justice has never been defined solely by convictions. Many have spoken about the importance of remembering the victims as people rather than reducing them to crime statistics or documentary subjects. Photographs displayed at memorial events reveal ordinary moments. Birthday celebrations, family vacations, school portraits, smiles captured long before fear entered their lives. Those images tell a different story from the courtroom evidence. They remind us that before becoming victims, these women were daughters, sisters, mothers, classmates, co-workers, and friends. The Green River investigation also stands as a testament to quiet perseverance. The detectives who first walked the muddy riverbanks in 1982 could not have imagined the scientific breakthroughs that would eventually solve the case. They simply preserved what they found, documented every detail, stored every sample, recorded every interview. Their discipline became the foundation upon which future investigators built success. Justice belonged not to one brilliant moment, but to thousands of careful decisions made over decades. In that sense, the investigation belongs to everyone who refused to surrender. The search volunteers who spent weekends combing dense forests. The forensic technicians who protected fragile evidence year after year. The anthropologists who painstakingly reconstructed identities from skeletal remains. The prosecutors who balanced punishment with the possibility of recovering additional victims. The victim advocates who ensured families remained informed and supported. The relatives who never stopped asking questions, even when hope seemed almost impossible to sustain. Together, they transformed one of America's largest unsolved serial murder investigations into one of its most significant forensic successes. Today, law enforcement officers continue studying the Green River case, not because they expect history to repeat itself exactly, but because its lessons remain timeless. Preserve every piece of evidence. Never assume technology has reached its final limit. Treat every missing person with urgency. Document everything. Remain patient. Work collaboratively. Most importantly, never mistake the absence of answers for the absence of truth. Sometimes the truth simply requires time. The Green River murders left scars that will never fully disappear. Families continue grieving. Communities continue remembering. Investigators continue reflecting on decisions made under extraordinary pressure. The forests where victims were discovered have changed with the passing seasons. Trees have grown taller. Roads have been widened. Neighborhoods have expanded. Nature has reclaimed places once marked by crime scene tape and forensic tents. But memory resists erosion. It survives in archived case files, court transcripts, family photographs, memorial services, training academies, forensic laboratories, and in every detective who opens an old evidence box believing that one overlooked fragment might still contain the answer to another forgotten mystery. Perhaps that is the Green River investigation's greatest legacy. It reminds us that justice is rarely immediate. Sometimes it arrives after years of disappointment. Sometimes after generations of persistence. Sometimes through scientific discoveries unimaginable when the crime first occurred. But when investigators refuse to abandon the truth, when families refuse to let memories fade, and when evidence is preserved with the hope that tomorrow may reveal what today cannot, even the longest silence can eventually be broken. The Green River killer believed the passage of time would bury his crimes beneath forests, rivers, and forgotten roads. Instead, time became the very force that exposed him. Not because the years were kind, but because those who searched never stopped believing that somewhere, hidden inside a microscopic trace of evidence and the unwavering determination of countless investigators, the truth was still waiting to be found. And in the end, it was